My family ambushed me at my own dining table, demanding I surrender my $1.5 million penthouse to my pregnant sister. When my father slid the legal deed across the table and threatened to destroy me in court if I refused, he had no idea I was already holding the $420,000 secret that would ruin his life forever. Before I reveal how their entitled scheme spectacularly backfired, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to fight your own toxic family to protect what is rightfully yours. The harsh scraping sound of thick legal parchment sliding across my custom mahogany dining table shattered the quiet of my Sunday evening. I sat perfectly still as the document came to a halt right in front of me. At 34 years old, I had spent a decade building a highly successful boutique public relations agency. I was used to high-stakes negotiations and hostile takeovers, but looking across the table at the people who were supposed to be my family, I felt a distinct icy calm wash over me. "Sign it, Clara, my father," Richard demanded. His voice echoed in the high-ceilinged room, carrying the uncompromising authority he reserved for business deals and disobedient employees. "Your sister needs the space for the new baby, a lot more than you need a 3-bedroom penthouse for one person." Across from me, my 32-year-old sister Bethany shifted in her chair. She rubbed her 5-month pregnant belly, offering me a smug, entitled smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She had always been the golden child, the one who received endless praise and financial bailouts, while my achievements were consistently ignored. Beside her sat her husband, Jamal. He wore a bespoke suit that cost more than my first car, a suit I knew for a fact he could not actually afford. Jamal liked to call himself an entrepreneur, though his primary occupation seemed to consist of launching vague startups that inevitably failed. He leaned back comfortably in my expensive dining chair, swirling a generous pour of my best scotch in a crystal tumbler. "Come on, Clara," Jamal said smoothly, offering his best salesman smile. "It is just brick and mortar. Family takes care of family, right? You have done incredibly well for yourself. Bethany and I just need a fresh start." I did not flinch. I placed my hand flat against the document and pushed it firmly across the polished wood, stopping it exactly in front of my father. "I have made 42 consecutive mortgage payments on this brick-and-mortar, Jamal," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of the hysterical emotion they were waiting for. "That is $230,000 straight out of my own pocket." I did not miss a single payment. Every square foot of hardwood and every drop of that scotch you are currently drinking was paid for by the agency you all love to dismiss. Bethany scoffed loudly, dramatically, shifting her weight and looking at our mother for immediate validation. My mother, Barbara, did not disappoint. She slammed her hand down on the table, her rings clinking sharply against the glass chargers. "Do not be greedy, Clara." My mother snapped her face, twisting into a familiar expression of disdain. "You are a single woman. You have no husband and no prospects. You have absolutely no need for 3 bedrooms and a wraparound terrace overlooking the city. Your sister is bringing a new life into this family, and instead of stepping up to fulfill your duty, you are sitting here counting pennies like a miser." I did not raise my voice. "Pennies?" I asked coldly. $250,000 in equity is not pennies, Mom. It is my life savings. Your father generously co-signed that mortgage 42 months ago." My mother yelled, her voice echoing through the open concept living space. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "He put his neck on the line for you because your public relations business was just a risky hobby back then. The bank would not even look at you without a real man with a real career backing you up. Technically, he owns half of this penthouse." I turned my gaze to my father, who sat there with his arms crossed, nodding along with my mother's revisionist history. He puffed out his chest, clearly proud of the narrative they had constructed to justify their theft. They had completely rewritten the past to make my success look like his charity, because his name is on the deed as a guarantor. My mother continued, her tone shifting to one of absolute authority. "We have decided that it is only fair to transfer his half of the property to Bethany and Jamal. And since you owe your entire success to your father's initial generosity, you will be transferring your half as well. We are gifting the penthouse to them for the baby. It is a fresh start for Jamal's new business venture. A fresh start, I repeated, looking directly at Jamal. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze but quickly masked it by adjusting his silk tie. Yes, Clara, a fresh start. The consulting firm I am launching requires a certain image, Jamal said smoothly, leaning forward. Hosting elite clients in a luxury downtown penthouse presents stability and success. It is an investment in the family's future wealth. When my firm takes off, we will of course take care of you. We could even hire your agency to do some minor promotional work for us. My mother nodded vigorously in agreement. You see, Clara? She said, her tone shifting to that fake sweetness she used when she wanted her way. Jamal has a vision. He is a provider building an empire for his family. You are just a single woman hoarding space you do not need. Think of how proud you will feel knowing you provided a nursery for your sister's first child. You have always been so resistant to being part of this family. This is your chance to finally do something selfless. I stared at the woman who had birthed me, listening to her weaponize my independence against me. Selfless, I repeated. You want me to render myself completely homeless to subsidize the lifestyle of a man who wears a $4,000 suit but cannot qualify for a basic car loan. Bethany's face contorted with pure hatred. You are a bitter, sad woman, Clara, she spat, gripping her belly protectively, as if my words were physically attacking her child. Jamal is twice the man anyone you have ever dated was. You are just trying to ruin my happiness because no one wants to marry you. You have a huge, empty penthouse and a cold, empty heart. I did not let her theatrical display derail me. I turned my attention back to my parents, refusing to let them control the room with their emotional outbursts. I paid back your initial $20,000 down payment gift within the first 6 months of moving in, I stated, laying out the undeniable facts. I wrote you a cashier's check for $22,000 to cover the interest you demanded. Dad is only on the paperwork as a guarantor because my business was less than 2 years old at the time, and the underwriters required a secondary signature for liability purposes. He has not paid a single property tax bill. He has not paid a single monthly maintenance fee to the building association. He has absolutely zero financial stake in this property, and you both know it. My father slammed both of his hands onto the table, rattling the silverware and causing Bethany to jump. Do not speak to your mother like that, he bellowed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. I am on the deed, Clara. That makes me an owner in the eyes of the law. I gave you the foundation to build your little life, and now I am calling in the debt. You will sign this penthouse over to your pregnant sister tonight, or there will be severe consequences. I looked at the four of them, a unified front of entitlement and delusion. They genuinely believed they could bully me into surrendering my entire net worth simply because Bethany had managed to get pregnant by a man who could not hold down a job. They had spent my entire life treating me like an automatic teller machine, expecting me to quietly fund Bethany's mistakes and subsidize their image of the perfect family. You have 10 seconds to put that pen to paper, my father threatened, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. If you do not sign that quitclaim deed right now, I will take you to court. I will force a partition sale of this property. I will drag you through years of litigation until your precious little agency goes bankrupt from legal fees. You will lose the penthouse anyway, Clara, and you will walk away with absolutely nothing. Do not test me. I did not flinch. I kept my voice eerily steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. You seem to have selective amnesia regarding that foundation you claim to have given me, I stated, leaning slightly across the table. You gave me a $20,000 check to help with the closing costs. You called it a gift in front of the entire extended family at Thanksgiving. But behind closed doors, you forced me to sign a promissory note with a 6% interest rate. I paid you back in full exactly $21,200 within 6 months of moving in. I have the bank transfers and your signed confirmation of the cleared debt sitting in my safe. My father's face contorted. A mottled, deep purple flush spread from his thick neck all the way up to his hairline. The veins at his temples bulged visibly against his skin as he absorbed my defiance. He brought both of his heavy fists down onto the table with a deafening crash that made the fine china rattle and caused Bethany to let out a startled shriek. "You ungrateful little brat," he roared, spit flying from his lips. "I am on the deed. The law does not care about your little bank receipts for a down payment. The law sees two names on a property record. If you do not sign that quitclaim deed and hand this penthouse over to your sister right now, I will take you to court on Monday morning. I will file for a forced partition sale." Jamal smirked from the sidelines, swirling his drink with practiced arrogance. "Listen to your father, Clara," Jamal said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "You do not want a messy public legal battle. It would be terrible for your agency brand to have your name dragged through the mud in open court." My mother chimed in immediately, clutching the pearl necklace at her throat. "A judge will force the bank to liquidate the asset," she warned, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "You will lose the penthouse anyway, Clara, and you will be drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees. We are trying to save you from your own stubbornness. Just sign the paper and we can all go back to being a happy family." My father leaned closer across the table, trying to physically intimidate me with his bulk. "You will walk away with absolutely nothing," he threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious growl. "I will make sure the legal costs bleed your little agency dry. You will be back in a studio apartment by Christmas. Sign the paper." They waited for me to break. They expected the tears, the desperate pleading, the frantic apologies they had successfully conditioned me to offer since I was a child. They thought the terrifying threat of total financial ruin would force me back into my designated role as the family scapegoat. I looked at my mother's fake concern, at my father's tyrannical rage, at my sister's smug entitlement, and finally at Jamal, who was raising my expensive scotch to his lips for another sip. I did not cry. I did not plead. I stood up from my chair with slow, deliberate precision. I walked directly over to Jamal, reached out and snatched the heavy crystal glass right out of his hand before the liquor could even touch his mouth. He let out a sound of pure indignation, but I ignored him, dumping the $300 liquor straight into the dirt of the centerpiece planter on the dining table. "Get out," I said. My voice was not a scream. It was a cold, absolute command that cut through the heavy tension in the room like a physical blade. I pointed a steady hand toward the private elevator that opened directly into my foyer. "Get the hell out of my house!" My mother gasped in horror, pressing her hands against her chest. "You are kicking a pregnant woman out into the night," she cried out, looking at me as if I had just committed a violent crime. "The elevator goes straight down to the heated lobby parking garage, Mom," I replied, my arm still extended toward the doors. "She will not have to walk a single step in the cold. Leave. Now." My father scoffed in disgust, aggressively grabbing his suit jacket from the back of his chair. "You are making the biggest mistake of your miserable life, Clara," he declared aggressively, shoving his arms into his sleeves. "We are done playing nice. You brought this entirely on yourself." Jamal scrambled up from the table, hastily adjusting his silk cuffs. He suddenly looked much smaller and far less confident without my expensive liquor in his hand. He guided Bethany toward the foyer with exaggerated care. She waddled into the elevator, turning back to face me just as the metallic doors began to slide shut. Her features were twisted into an ugly, venomous sneer that completely erased her victim persona. "You are going to lose everything," Bethany hissed, her hateful voice echoing loudly in the marble foyer. "Our lawyers are going to absolutely destroy you." I stared right back into her eyes until the heavy metal doors clicked together and sealed them away. The sudden silence of the penthouse was deafening, but my hands were not shaking. I did not waste a single second mourning the toxic family I had just permanently severed ties with. I walked straight to my home office, picked up my phone, and bypassed my contacts list, entirely dialing a number I knew by heart. It rang exactly twice before a sharp, authoritative voice answered. "Harrison," I said, addressing my high-powered attorney without any pleasantries. "My father is threatening a partition sale on the penthouse. He wants to force a liquidation to give the equity to Bethany and her husband." Harrison paused on the other end of the line, the sound of keyboard clicking stopping instantly. "He thinks he can use a guarantor status to force a partition on a fully serviced asset," Harrison asked, his tone shifting immediately into pure calculated legal strategy. He has a sleazy lawyer named Mitchell backing him up, I explained, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and staring out at the glowing city skyline. They brought a quit-claim deed to dinner and gave me an ultimatum to sign it or face financial ruin in court. Do not sign a single thing, Harrison instructed, a dark, dangerous amusement entering his voice. Let them try to sue. I will see you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. We are going to war. The sun had barely crested the city skyline when my phone began vibrating violently against my marble nightstand. It was a relentless, angry buzzing that signaled a coordinated attack. I reached over and tapped the screen. 68 unread text messages, 14 missed calls, 20 notifications from various social media platforms. I sat up, poured myself a glass of water, and opened the family group chat. Bethany had wasted absolutely no time. At 6 a.m, she had gone live on her primary social media accounts. I clicked the link my aunt had furiously forwarded to me. The video filled my screen, and I had to hand it to my sister. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. Bethany was sitting on the floor of her rented townhouse, strategically positioned against a blank, undecorated wall to make her surroundings look as bleak and depressing as possible. She was wearing a faded, oversized sweater, and her hair was deliberately messy. It was a stark contrast to the designer maternity clothes and fresh salon blowout she had worn in my dining room just 12 hours prior. She looked directly into the camera lens, her eyes glistening with perfectly summoned tears. She cradled her 5-month baby bump with both hands, her voice trembling as she spoke. I did not want to bring family drama to the internet. Bethany sniffled, wiping away a stray tear. But Jamal and I are facing a terrifying reality today. We were promised a safe, secure home for our first child. We were told that family takes care of family. But last night, a greedy, childless woman in our own family looked me in the eye and told me she would rather see her pregnant sister homeless than share even a fraction of her massive, empty penthouse. I watched the video with the detached, critical eye of a public relations professional. Bethany never used my name, but she painted a vivid, unmistakable picture for anyone who knew us. She talked about how some people worship money and square footage more than human life. She talked about the extreme stress affecting her unborn baby. She ended the video by burying her face in her hands and sobbing, whispering that she did not know where they were going to live next month because they had counted on that fresh start. The comments section was a predictable dumpster fire of manufactured outrage. Thousands of strangers were offering their prayers, validating her victimhood, and demanding to know the identity of the heartless sister who would put a pregnant woman out on the street. But the real vitriol was in my text messages. The extended family had mobilized with terrifying speed. My Aunt Susan, who had not spoken to me since I refused to hire her unqualified son 2 years ago, sent a massive paragraph calling me a cold, barren sociopath who did not understand the sanctity of motherhood. My cousin Greg texted me to say I was a disgrace to the family name and that my money had turned me into a monster. My mother had sent 20 separate messages, each more unhinged than the last, demanding I apologize to Bethany immediately before this ruined my agency reputation. They expected a massive reaction. They expected me to panic. In my family, public shaming was the ultimate weapon. It was exactly how my mother had controlled the narrative for 3 decades. Whenever someone stepped out of line, they were subjected to a barrage of guilt and social pressure until they caved and begged for forgiveness. They assumed that because my business relied heavily on public image, I would immediately fold to protect my brand. They severely underestimated exactly what I do for a living. I am a crisis management expert. I handle devastating scandals for politicians, celebrities, and corporate executives on a daily basis. I know better than anyone that when a narcissist sets a trap on the internet, the absolute worst thing you can do is jump into the mud and wrestle with them. Silence is a vacuum, and a vacuum drives attention-seeking people completely insane. I did not reply to Aunt Susan. I did not reply to Cousin Greg. I did not post a defensive statement on my own social media accounts explaining the mortgage payments. I simply turned off my notifications, got out of bed, and went for a rigorous 5-mile run. By the time I arrived at my agency at 9 o'clock, the silence was already taking a massive toll on them. My phone showed another wave of messages, but the tone was beginning to shift from self-righteous anger to frantic frustration. Bethany had posted two more updates. They were passive-aggressive quotes about toxic family members cutting ties, clearly trying to bait me into a public argument to boost her engagement. My mother had left a rambling voicemail, her voice shrill and breathy, demanding to know why I was ignoring them and asking if I had hired a lawyer. My father texted me a direct threat. "You are not going to ignore us, Clara. We are giving you one last chance to fix this before we take the gloves off and destroy you." I sat at my sleek glass desk sipping my morning espresso and opened my laptop. I pulled up the real estate records, the bank transfers, and the legal documents I had compiled the night before. I forwarded everything directly to Harrison via a secure encrypted server. Let them scream into the void. Every threatening text message my father sent was just more evidence of extortion. Every defamatory video my sister posted was grounds for a harassment suit. They were handing me the exact ammunition I needed to bury them permanently, and they were too blinded by their own arrogance to realize it. Around noon, the absolute lack of response from me pushed them right over the edge. In my family, control was oxygen. By refusing to engage, I was suffocating them. My mother sent a message to the family group chat in all capital letters, furious that her shaming tactics were failing to produce the desired result. She declared that I could not hide behind my fancy agency doors forever. She stated that since I was too much of a coward to answer my phone, she was going to force a conversation whether I liked it or not. I read the message and calmly locked my phone screen. I knew exactly what that meant. My mother was an escalator. If she could not win an argument through digital harassment, she would bring the circus directly to my doorstep. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the front lobby security desk. I informed the head guard that I was expecting an unwelcome visitor and that under no circumstances was Barbara or Richard to be allowed past the reception area without my direct authorization. I hung up the phone and turned back to my monitor, diving into a marketing campaign for a client. The smear campaign was just the opening salvo. They wanted a war, and I was going to let them march right onto the battlefield completely unarmed. I did not have to wait long. Less than an hour later, the polished glass doors of my agency swung open and the real confrontation began. The heavy frosted glass doors to my private executive suite did not just open, they were violently shoved apart. They hit the rubber doorstops with a sharp crack that echoed over the low hum of ringing phones and muted conversations on the agency floor. My executive assistant, Sarah, hovered frantically in the doorway, her hands raised in a gesture of helpless panic. She was a professional who regularly intercepted aggressive reporters and demanding corporate clients, but even she was entirely unprepared for the sheer unhinged momentum of a 60-year-old mother operating on pure entitlement. "I am so sorry, Clara," Sarah gasped, glancing nervously over her shoulder at the open bullpen of employees who had suddenly stopped typing. She just bypassed the front reception desk completely and pushed right past the lobby security guards. She said it was a family emergency. I raised a hand, offering Sarah a calm nod of dismissal. "It is fine, Sarah. Please close the door behind her and hold all my calls for the next 10 minutes. We will not be needing any more an audience." Sarah nodded quickly, stepping backward and sealing the heavy glass door shut, instantly muting the ambient noise of the agency. My mother, Barbara, stood in the center of my meticulously designed office, breathing heavily. She was wearing her pristine tennis club attire, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her hands like a weapon. Her face was flushed an angry, blotchy red, her eyes darting frantically around my spacious office, taking in the panoramic views of the city skyline, the custom leather furniture, and the walls lined with prestigious industry awards. It was a visual representation of a success she actively despised because it had nothing to do with her or my father. "You are going to fix this massive mess right now, Clara," my mother shrieked, marching right up to my desk and slamming her heavy purse onto the polished glass surface. "Bethany is sitting at home crying her eyes out. Her video has tens of thousands of views already. You are being publicly humiliated on the internet, and you deserve every single second of it for the selfish stunt you pulled last night." Everyone in the family knows what a monster you are. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I leaned back slowly in my ergonomic leather chair, folded my hands together, and looked at her with the exact same detached professional expression I used when handling hostile corporate negotiations. "Are you finished, Barbara?" I asked deliberately, using her first name to establish that this was no longer a mother and daughter dynamic. This was my territory. She gasped, clutching her pearls in a gesture of pure theatrical outrage. "How dare you speak to me like that? You are out of control, Clara. We are done negotiating with you. You are going to call a realtor this afternoon, and you are going to buy yourself a sensible one-bedroom condo. That is all a single woman with no prospects actually needs. Then you are going to transfer the deed of the penthouse directly to Jamal and Bethany. They are bringing a child into this world. They need a proper family home to raise my grandchild, and they need the prestige of that property to launch Jamal's new business." I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity of her demands. She had stormed into my place of business, bypassed my staff, and loudly demanded that I purchase a completely new property for myself, just so I could gift a $1.5 million asset to a man who had never worked an honest day in his life. "You came all the way down here because my silence on social media was driving you insane," I stated, factually, watching her jaw clench as my words hit their mark. "You thought that because I run a public relations firm, I would be terrified of Bethany's little smear campaign. You thought a few nasty text messages from Aunt Susan would force me to surrender my life savings to protect my brand. You severely misunderstand what I do for a living. I manage catastrophic scandals for multinational corporations. Bethany crying without makeup on a cheap rug is not a crisis. It is a temper tantrum." My mother slammed her hand against the desk. "You will not disrespect your sister. Jamal is stepping up to provide for his family, and you are standing in the way of their future." "A provider," I repeated softly, reaching out and tapping my mouse to wake up my dual computer monitors. That is a fascinating choice of words. Since I run a crisis management firm, the very first step of my job is absolute due diligence. When someone threatens my assets, I look into exactly who I am dealing with. I had my investigative team run a comprehensive financial and legal background check on Jamal the second I arrived at the office this morning. I grabbed the edge of my large monitor and physically turned it around so the screen directly faced my mother. I tapped the screen right where the highlighted red text of the report was displayed. "Let us talk about Jamal's fresh start," I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet and icy. "I am looking at a trail of absolute financial devastation. He has 2 failed business loans from the past 4 years, totaling $85,000, both of which are currently in collections. He has a defaulted commercial lease on a warehouse space from his last disastrous startup venture. He is currently facing active litigation from 3 separate independent vendors for unpaid invoices. Jamal is not a provider trying to build an empire, Mom. He is a walking financial liability, looking for a free ride, and you want to hand him the keys to a multi-million-dollar property so he can leverage it into the ground." I watched the color completely drain from my mother's face. The angry red flush vanished, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray as her eyes scanned the undeniable legal documents and credit reports displayed on my screen. The cognitive dissonance was hitting her like a freight train. The perfect son-in-law narrative she had paraded around her country club was a complete and utter fiction. But instead of apologizing, instead of realizing that Bethany had married a con artist, and that my father was risking his own retirement to support them, the toxic family programming kicked into overdrive. She doubled down. "So what?" my mother screamed, her voice cracking as she desperately tried to justify the delusion. "He has had some bad luck. Business is difficult. He is trying to build a legacy for his wife and his unborn child. It is your absolute duty as the older unmarried sister to absorb their financial burdens." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the admission. "You have all this money, Clara," she continued, gesturing wildly around my office. "You have a massive agency. You have a penthouse. You have no husband and no children. What else is your wealth for, if not to support the family? Bethany is fulfilling her biological purpose. She is giving us a grandchild. You are just a selfish spinster hoarding resources you do not even need. It is your obligation to bail them out. She had finally said the quiet part out loud. In her eyes, my lack of a husband and children meant my life had zero inherent value. My only purpose was to serve as a financial safety net for the golden child who had followed the traditional script. I slowly reached across my desk and pressed the intercom button. Marcus, I said calmly, addressing the head of building security. Please come up to the executive suite immediately. We have a trespasser who needs an aggressive physical escort off the premises. My mother's eyes went wide with pure shock. You cannot throw your own mother out of a building. I am not leaving until you agree to sign those papers, Clara. I stood up, adjusting my tailored suit jacket, looking down at the woman who had just demanded I sacrifice my entire existence for her favorite daughter. You are leaving right now, Barbara, and if you or my father ever set foot near my agency or my penthouse again, I will have you both arrested for criminal trespassing. The heavy glass doors opened behind her. Two large security guards wearing earpieces stepped into the office, their expressions stern and uncompromising. Ma'am, you need to come with us right now, the taller guard stated, gesturing firmly toward the exit. My mother grabbed her purse, her face twisting into a mask of absolute hatred. She pointed a shaking finger at me as the guards closed in around her. You are dead to us, Clara, she shrieked as they began to physically guide her toward the hallway. You are entirely alone in this world. I stood in the center of my quiet office, listening to her screams fade down the corridor. I was not alone. I had myself my business and a $420,000 secret about my father that was about to turn their entire world upside down. The silence in my office lasted exactly 18 hours before my father launched his next offensive. I was in the middle of reviewing a press release for a major tech client the following morning when Sarah knocked sharply on my glass door. She stepped inside holding a thick manila envelope adorned with a bright red certified mail sticker. The courier had demanded a direct signature. I took the heavy package from her hands, noting the embossed return address in the top left corner. Mitchell and Associates. Arthur Mitchell was my father's longtime golfing buddy and the family attorney. He was the kind of lawyer who wore cheap cologne, drove a leased sports car he loved to show off, and firmly believed that shouting louder than the opposing counsel made his arguments legally binding. He was a bully in a cheap suit, which made him the perfect attack dog for a man like my father. I sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener and slid out 3 pages of dense, heavy bond paper. It was a formal demand for partition and notice of intent to sue. The document was a masterpiece of aggressive intimidation tactics disguised as legal procedure. Mitchell had stuffed the letter full of terrifying legal jargon designed specifically to make a layman panic. He cited breach of implied contract. He claimed my father had a vested, equitable interest in my penthouse due to his guarantor status. He formally demanded that I surrender the quitclaim deed within exactly 14 days. If I failed to comply, the letter stated, they would immediately file a lawsuit in state court to force a public auction of my home. The final paragraph was entirely dedicated to threats. Mitchell explicitly stated that I would be held fully liable for all of their mounting legal fees, court costs, and whatever financial damages Bethany might suffer from being denied her rightful family home. They were trying to scare me into absolute submission. They wanted me to look at those 14 days as a ticking time bomb counting down to my total financial ruin. I read the letter a second time, applying the exact same analytical lens I used for my corporate clients facing public extortion. In the public relations world, when a hostile entity sets an aggressive artificial deadline, it means they are trying to force a mistake. They want you to panic and concede before you have time to actually investigate their leverage. I did not panic. I calmly placed the document back into its manila envelope, picked up my blazer from the back of my chair, and walked out into the bullpen. Cancel my afternoon strategy meetings. Sarah, I instructed, sliding my arms into my jacket. I have an urgent appointment downtown. If Barbara or Bethany show up here again, call the police immediately. Do not engage with them. Engage with. I took the private elevator down to the parking garage and drove my car straight into the heart of the financial district. I did not bother making an appointment. Harrison operated out of a sleek minimalist corner office on the 42nd floor of a glass skyscraper. He was everything Arthur Mitchell was not. Harrison was a shark who never raised his voice. He had built his reputation defending disgraced politicians and ruthless tech billionaires, dismantling opposing legal teams with a quiet, surgical precision that left them absolutely devastated. I retained him years ago for my business, but today I needed his particular brand of ruthlessness for my personal life. His receptionist waved me right through, knowing I was a priority client. Harrison was sitting at his massive oak desk reviewing a dense contract. He looked up, his sharp gray eyes assessing my posture instantly. "You do not look like a woman here to discuss corporate retainer fees." "Clara," he noted, setting his expensive fountain pen down. I walked across the plush carpet and dropped Mitchell's thick envelope directly onto his pristine desk. "My father is officially declaring war." I stated, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite him. "He just served me with a demand for partition. He gave me 14 days to hand over a $1.1 million equity stake to my sister, or he files a lawsuit to auction the penthouse." Harrison did not show a flicker of surprise. He picked up the envelope, slid the papers out, and began reading. He read with terrifying speed, his eyes scanning the aggressive threats and inflated legal claims. I watched his face closely. With every paragraph he read, the slight rigid tension in his jaw began to relax. By the time he reached the final page, a distinct cold amusement danced in his eyes. "Arthur Mitchell," Harrison mused, dropping the papers back onto his desk with a soft thud. "I have destroyed him in court twice. He is a glorified ambulance chaser who uses intimidation to force out-of-court settlements because he lacks the actual skill to win a trial." "Can my father force a partition sale?" I asked, needing the absolute truth. "He is listed as a guarantor on the original mortgage documents from 10 years ago." Harrison folded his hands together, resting his chin on his fingertips. "A guarantor provides a safety net for the bank, Clara. It does not automatically grant equitable ownership, especially not when you have a meticulously documented 10-year paper trail proving you paid the down payment, the property taxes, the maintenance fees, and every single monthly mortgage installment. If they actually take this to court, Mitchell will have to prove your father made substantial financial contributions to the property. We both know he cannot do that." "Then why the aggressive 14-day deadline?" I asked, leaning forward. "Why threaten a massive public lawsuit they know they cannot easily win?" "My father hates public embarrassment more than anything. Dragging our family name through a bitter real estate dispute goes against his entire philosophy of keeping up appearances." Harrison smiled sharply, a predator catching the scent of blood in the water. "That is exactly the right question, Clara. Litigation is incredibly expensive. Filing a partition lawsuit requires upfront court fees, formal property appraisals, and a massive retainer for Mitchell. It also requires an extensive discovery phase where we would get total access to your father's financial records." Harrison leaned forward, tapping his index finger against the bold red 14-day deadline printed on the letter. "Let them sue. But nobody forces a partition sale on a fully paid-up asset unless they are desperate for liquid cash. This aggressive timeline is a massive red flag. Your father is trying to bully you into a quick, quiet transfer because he needs that equity immediately. Let us do a forensic dive into your father's finances. I bet something is rotting under the floorboards." I walked out of Harrison's glass-paneled skyscraper and stepped into the crisp downtown air. The 14-day countdown had officially begun. In exactly 2 weeks, Arthur Mitchell expected me to surrender the deed to my home or face a massive public lawsuit. I pulled my phone from my designer trench coat pocket and initiated a strict protocol of absolute radio silence. I blocked Arthur Mitchell's email address from my agency server, routing his correspondence directly to Harrison. I muted every single member of my extended family. Silence is the heaviest weapon in crisis management. When you refuse to react, you force the opposition to negotiate entirely with their own paranoia. Over the next 14 days, my life became a masterclass in compartmentalization. At the agency, I operated with surgical precision. I successfully navigated a product recall for a major pharmaceutical client. I launched a global rebranding campaign for a luxury hospitality group. I sat at the head of my glass boardroom table, projecting absolute calm and control, directing teams of account executives and media planners. My professional world was orderly, lucrative, and completely insulated from the toxic circus my family was trying to drag me into. But the circus was definitely performing. Because I had muted my family, their messages went straight to a designated folder on my phone. Every evening, sitting on the custom velvet sofa in my supposedly contested penthouse, I poured a glass of Cabernet and reviewed the day's digital harassment with the detached amusement of a scientist studying a predictable bacterial culture. My father Richard was deteriorating rapidly. The man who had spent his entire life projecting an image of stoic, untouchable authority was absolutely unraveling in my voicemail inbox. Without my immediate submission, his grand illusion of control was shattering. By day 4, his messages shifted from stern parental disappointment to aggressive financial threats. He left a 3-minute voicemail completely devoid of basic logic. He shouted that he was going to destroy my credit score. He threatened to call my banking institutions and report me for financial fraud. He claimed he was going to personally drive down to the local courthouse and file a lien against my business. It was all baseless, legally unenforceable garbage, but he was banking on the hope that I was financially illiterate enough to believe him. By day 8, the emotional blackmail took a viciously misogynistic turn. I sat at my kitchen island, listening to a recording of my father explicitly stating that a single, childless woman had absolutely no right to hoard a luxury property. He aggressively proclaimed that Bethany was fulfilling her true purpose by expanding the family bloodline. He told me that my penthouse was a monument to my own selfish, barren existence. He genuinely believed that because I had chosen a career and financial independence over marrying the first mediocre man who offered me a ring, I was somehow indebted to the sister who had followed his outdated script. He declared that forcing a partition sale was not just a legal right, it was a moral correction. He wanted to strip me of my sanctuary to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. I forwarded every single audio file directly to Harrison. They were practically writing my harassment and extortion countersuit for me. While my father screamed into the void, Bethany continued her pathetic performance on the internet. She posted daily updates on her social media platforms, each one more melodramatic than the last. She shared pictures of tiny baby socks resting on cheap laminate flooring, accompanied by long paragraphs about the terrifying uncertainty of housing instability. She posted tearful videos claiming that the stress of dealing with a greedy, heartless family member was causing her severe medical complications. The comments section was flooded with sympathetic strangers demanding justice for the poor pregnant woman. Aunt Susan and Cousin Greg had taken it upon themselves to act as her digital attack dogs. They shared her posts across their own networks, tagging my agency's public business pages in an attempt to shame me professionally. It was a coordinated smear campaign designed to apply maximum pressure. They assumed that PR agencies were terrified of bad press. They forgot that I own the agency. I instructed my digital security team to silently archive every defamatory post, every tagged comment, and every malicious review. We cataloged IP addresses and timestamped the harassment. I was not going to send a cease and desist letter. I was building a comprehensive defamation case that would bankrupt all of them. The contrast between my reality and their delusion was staggering. They thought they were backing me into a corner. They thought my silence was proof that their intimidation tactics were working. They believed I was cowering in my apartment, frantically trying to figure out how to surrender my property without losing face. In reality, I was hunting. Harrison had deployed his best forensic accountant, a ruthless man named David, who treated offshore bank accounts and hidden liabilities like a crossword puzzle. While my father was leaving unhinged voicemails about destroying my credit score, David was quietly dissecting 40 years of my father's financial history. On day 11 of the countdown, Harrison called me on my secure line. I locked my office door and answered. "Your father is drowning." "Clara," Harrison stated, his voice stripped of any pleasantries. David found the rot. I pulled a legal pad toward me and picked up a pen. "Tell me everything." Arthur Mitchell's threat of a partition sale was never about getting Bethany a house, Harrison explained, the cold satisfaction evident in his tone. It is a desperate cash grab. Your father has leveraged himself into oblivion. He took out massive secondary mortgages on the family home to fund a series of catastrophic commercial real estate investments. He is currently underwater by almost $2 million. His primary business accounts are hemorrhaging cash, and he has creditors circling like vultures. I stopped writing. The image of the untouchable wealthy patriarch was disintegrating right before my eyes. He needs the liquid cash, I murmured, piecing the puzzle together. Exactly, Harrison confirmed. If he forces a partition sale of your penthouse, he thinks he can claim a massive percentage of the equity based on his original guarantor status. He is using Bethany's pregnancy as a smokescreen to obscure his own financial ruin. He does not want to give that penthouse to Jamal and Bethany. He wants the court to force an auction so he can take his cut of the proceeds and pay off his commercial debts before the bank forecloses on your childhood home. The sheer level of manipulation was breathtaking. My father was willing to destroy my life, weaponize my pregnant sister, and drag our family through a public legal battle just to cover up his own spectacular failures. He was trying to cannibalize my hard-earned stability to feed his massive ego. And the $420,000 transfer, I asked, referring to the exact amount I had paid to clear the final balance of the penthouse mortgage 5 years ago. David tracked it, Harrison replied smoothly. We have irrefutable proof that every single cent of that final payoff came directly from your LLC's operational accounts. Your father did not contribute a dime. In fact, we found records showing he actually attempted to borrow against your penthouse equity 3 years ago, but the bank denied the application because his debt-to-income ratio was already catastrophic. He was trying to steal from me long before Bethany got pregnant. Harrison chuckled softly. Your father is playing a very dangerous game with an empty hand, Clara. We have the complete financial dossier ready. We can prove the extortion. We can prove the defamation. We can prove he holds zero equitable interest in your property. We are just waiting for the clock to run out. I hung up the phone and looked out over the city. Tomorrow was day 14. Tomorrow, Arthur Mitchell's arbitrary deadline would expire. My father would wake up expecting a white flag. He would expect a desperate phone call begging for a settlement. He would expect me to hand over the keys to my kingdom to save his sinking ship. I smiled, the reflection of the city lights catching in the glass of my office window. Let the deadline expire. I was ready to bring the entire house of cards crashing down. The 14-day deadline expired in absolute silence from my end. Instead of caving to their manufactured panic or responding to my father's increasingly unhinged voicemails, I directed my energy into executing the most crucial event of my agency's fiscal year. The annual Horizon Trust Charity Gala was not just a philanthropic endeavor. It was a highly concentrated gathering of the most powerful corporate executives, venture capitalists, and political figures in the city. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was draped in midnight blue velvet and illuminated by cascading crystal chandeliers. Waitstaff moved silently through the crowd of tuxedo-clad billionaires and silk-gowned power brokers. I stood near the center of the room, holding a flute of sparkling water radiating the exact kind of untouchable success my family actively despised. My security team had strict instructions regarding my parents, but I had deliberately left a loophole at the secondary entrance. I knew the sheer concentration of wealth in this room would be an irresistible magnet for a parasite. Sure enough, 45 minutes into the cocktail reception, my peripheral vision caught a flash of entirely inappropriate sequins. Bethany and Jamal had bypassed the official guest list by slipping in behind a group of major tech donors. Bethany was wearing a maternity dress that was far too tight and excessively sparkly for a black tie corporate event. Jamal was wearing a rented tuxedo that bunched noticeably at the shoulders. I did not immediately signal security. I wanted to watch them operate. Jamal was in his element, operating under the supreme delusion that he belonged in this room. He immediately targeted a cluster of angel investors near the ice sculpture. I watched him deploy his aggressively charming entrepreneur persona. He was handing out cheap business cards, laughing too loudly, and gesturing wildly as he pitched whatever vaporware business concept he was currently peddling. Bethany hung on his arm, playing the role of the adoring pregnant wife, occasionally throwing smug, triumphant glances in my direction. They genuinely believed they had outsmarted me. They thought my absolute radio silence over the past 2 weeks meant I was broken, cornered, and too intimidated to fight back. They thought my father's legal threats had paralyzed me. I was in the middle of a delicate conversation with Marcus Sterling, the ruthless CEO of a multinational logistics firm, and Elena Rostova, a prominent venture capitalist, known for destroying startups that failed to meet her standards. We were discussing a massive public relations retainer for the upcoming quarter. This was exactly the audience Jamal was looking for. He saw me standing with two titans of industry and decided it was the perfect moment to execute his ultimate power play. He assumed that because I was a public relations expert, I would do absolutely anything to avoid a public scene. He thought he could box me into a corner and force a verbal concession right in front of the people I desperately needed to impress. Jamal strode confidently across the ballroom floor. Bethany waddled quickly beside him, a camera ready, smile plastered across her face, clearly anticipating my public surrender. Clara Jamal boomed his voice, carrying easily over the soft jazz playing in the background. He extended his arms in a wide theatrical gesture that invaded our personal space. What an incredible event. You really know how to throw a party for your big clients. Marcus and Elena paused their conversation, looking at the intruders with polite, wealthy confusion. I maintained my serene professional smile. Jamal, I said smoothly, I do not recall seeing your name on the donor registry tonight. He waved off the comment with a loud chuckle, stepping uncomfortably close to our exclusive circle. Well, family does not need an invitation, right? Listen, Clara, I know you are busy schmoozing, but we really need to finalize our timeline. With the baby coming so soon, Bethany and I need to get the contractors scheduled. When exactly are you moving your things out of our new penthouse? We really want to get the nursery painted before the end of the month. The silence that fell over our small circle was absolute and freezing. Bethany placed both hands over her pregnant belly, looking at me with a sickeningly sweet expression of expectant victimhood. Jamal stood tall, puffing out his chest. He had dropped a nuclear bomb in the middle of my professional sanctuary. He was banking heavily on my desperate need to maintain decorum. He expected me to stammer, to pull him aside, to frantically whisper that we would handle the real estate transfer tomorrow if he just kept his mouth shut and walked away. He severely underestimated the kind of violence a cornered public relations expert is capable of inflicting. I did not lower my voice. I did not break eye contact. I leaned slightly forward, keeping my posture entirely relaxed, and let my professional smile sharpen into a blade. Oh, Jamal, I replied, my voice projecting clearly and carrying the bright, pleasant tone of someone discussing the weather. I am actually incredibly surprised to see you here networking tonight. I assumed you would be entirely too busy dodging that active IRS audit on your fraudulent consulting firm to worry about interior decorating. The impact of the words was instantaneous and physically visible. Jamal's arrogant, puffing posture completely collapsed. The color drained from his face so rapidly, he looked suddenly ill. Bethany let out a sharp, genuine gasp of horror, her hands dropping awkwardly from her belly to her sides. Marcus Sterling raised a distinguished eyebrow, taking a very deliberate step away from Jamal, as if the man were carrying an infectious disease. Elena Rostova's eyes narrowed with immediate predatory distaste. In the world of high finance, an IRS audit for fraud was the ultimate social poison. Jamal was instantly radioactive. You, Jamal stammered, his charismatic mask shattering into a million pieces. His eyes darted frantically around the room, suddenly realizing that the elite investors he had just been pitching to were now staring at him with overt suspicion and disgust. What are you talking about? You cannot just say things like that in public. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my sparkling water. I am simply expressing my concern for my brother-in-law. I continued, my voice echoing in the quiet space they had created. When my financial team pulled your public records last week, they found the two defaulted commercial loans and the $85,000 currently sitting in active collections. I just assumed that given your impending bankruptcy and the active litigation from your unpaid vendor's real estate acquisition would be at the absolute bottom of your priority list. But I suppose a man who defaults on his warehouse lease always needs to look for a free roof over his head. Bethany's face turned a brilliant mottled crimson. She looked at Jamal, pure panic flaring in her eyes. He had promised her an empire of wealth and status. I had just exposed him as a desperate squatter wearing a rented tuxedo. Jamal's mouth opened and closed silently. He looked at the billionaires surrounding us, realizing that his entire entrepreneurial facade had been annihilated in less than 60 seconds. He had come to my territory to humiliate me, and I had surgically stripped him of his only asset, his fabricated reputation. "We are leaving," Jamal hissed, grabbing Bethany by the upper arm with a rough, frantic grip. His polished demeanor was completely gone, replaced by the panicked, erratic energy of a cornered animal. He practically dragged my pregnant sister across the ballroom floor. Bethany stumbled in her heels, her face buried in her hands to hide her tears of humiliation from the surrounding high society guests. They did not walk out of the St. Regis. They fled. They practically sprinted past the crystal ice sculptures and out through the heavy mahogany doors, desperate to escape the devastating reality I had just dropped on their heads. I turned calmly back to Marcus and Elena. Neither of them looked shocked by my ruthlessness. In our industry, eliminating a threat quickly, factually, and publicly was a sign of extreme competence. "My apologies for the interruption," I said smoothly, setting my glass down on a passing waiter's silver tray. Unfortunately, even the best security cannot always prevent a desperate scam artist from slipping through the cracks. Now, Elena, you were mentioning the quarterly projections for the European expansion. Elena smiled, a slow, appreciative curve of her lips. She raised her champagne flute in a silent toast to my execution. I believe I was Clara. Let us discuss the retainer. The charity gala proceeded flawlessly, securing my agency millions in new corporate contracts. I spent the rest of the evening celebrating with my team, the image of Jamal's crumbling face, providing an excellent backdrop to my success. But as the night wound down and the ballroom finally emptied, my secure phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a direct message from Harrison. "The 14 days are up. Your father just formally filed the partition lawsuit in state court. He took the bait completely. Come to my office tomorrow at 8 in the morning. We are dropping the hammer." I pushed through the heavy glass doors of Harrison's firm at exactly 8 o'clock the following morning. The reception area was completely empty, still smelling faintly of industrial cleaning supplies. But Harrison's corner office was already brightly lit. He was sitting at his massive desk, a steaming cup of black coffee in one hand and a sleek silver pen in the other. Dead center on his pristine mahogany desk sat a black leather binder. It was at least 4 inches thick, bursting with financial spreadsheets, highlighted bank statements, and court filings. I took the seat across from him and crossed my legs, setting my bag on the floor. "You look incredibly well rested for a woman who was just formally sued by her own father," Harrison noted, taking a slow sip of his coffee. "I slept like a baby," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the black binder. "I assume that is the hammer you promised me last night." Harrison set his mug down and placed his hand flat against the leather cover. "We found the rot, Clara," he said, his voice dropping to that low, surgical tone he only used when he had entirely dismantled an opponent's case. "And it is much deeper and infinitely more toxic than we originally anticipated. Your father is not just drowning. He is actively pulling the rest of your family straight down to the bottom of the ocean with him." Harrison flipped the binder open. The first page was a master summary neatly broken down into color-coded sections. He tapped a manicured finger against the top paragraph. "Let us start with your charming brother-in-law," Harrison said, sliding a stack of highlighted bank statements across the desk toward me. "You already knew Jamal had a trail of failed businesses and defaulted commercial leases. What you did not know is how he funded that lifestyle while bringing in zero actual revenue. Jamal is a compulsive gambler." I picked up the statements, my eyes scanning the highlighted red lines. They were wire transfers. Dozens of them. Massive sums of money bleeding out of Jamal's so-called consulting firm accounts and disappearing into offshore sports betting platforms and private offshore accounts. "Jamal and Bethany are not just struggling," Harrison continued, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "They are completely and utterly insolvent. Jamal has racked up $420,000 in toxic debt. Half of that is from illegal sports betting, and the other half is from fraudulent business loans he secured by blatantly lying about his company's revenue. The IRS audit you so brilliantly mentioned at your gala last night is just the tip of the spear. He is facing potential federal wire fraud charges. I stared at the numbers, a cold, hard realization settling over me. Bethany had sat on my expensive rug and cried about needing a safe place for her baby, all while knowing her husband was blowing $500,000 on illegal gambling. But where did Jamal get the initial capital to secure those fraudulent loans? I asked my public relations brain, analyzing the timeline. A bank does not just hand over that kind of cash to a man with no verifiable income unless he has a massive guarantor backing him up. Harrison smiled. It was a terrifying, predatory expression. He reached into the binder and pulled out the second stack of documents. These were heavily stamped with state-county seals. He pushed them across the glass toward me. "That brings us to the bombshell," Harrison said softly. I picked up the first document. It was a property deed, but not mine. It was the deed to my parents' house, the sprawling, immaculate suburban colonial that my mother treated like a royal palace, the home she hosted her bridge club in, the property that served as the ultimate symbol of my father's lifelong success. "Look at the second page," Clara Harrison instructed. I flipped the page and my breath actually hitched in my throat. It was a massive home equity loan agreement signed exactly 12 months ago. "Your father did not just co-sign a business loan for Jamal Harrison," explained, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the desk. "A year ago, when Jamal's gambling debts first hit a critical breaking point, and the loan sharks started circling, your father quietly stepped in to save the golden couple. He secretly used his own primary residence, your childhood home, as collateral to secure a massive cash bailout for Jamal. He liquidated the entire equity of his own house to cover Jamal's fraudulent debts and keep your mother from finding out that her perfect son-in-law was a degenerate gambler." I stared at my father's signature on the loan document. The absolute sheer lunacy of it was staggering. He had risked the roof over his own head to protect Bethany's pristine suburban image. "But Jamal never stopped gambling," I stated, looking up at Harrison as the pieces rapidly snapped together. "The bailout money is completely gone." "Gone," Harrison confirmed with a sharp nod. "And because your father's own commercial real estate investments tanked this year, he could not keep up with the monthly payments on that massive home equity loan." Harrison reached over and tapped the final page of the document I was holding. It was a notice of default. "Your father is exactly 30 days away from total foreclosure," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The bank is taking the house, Clara. In exactly 1 month, your mother's perfect country club mansion is going on the public auction block. They are completely bankrupt." The silence in the office was absolute. I sat frozen in my leather chair as the true magnitude of my family's depravity finally locked into place. The entire smear campaign, the coordinated social media harassment, my mother storming into my agency, Arthur Mitchell's aggressive 14-day demand letter threatening to force a partition sale. None of it was actually about giving Bethany and Jamal a fresh start in a luxury penthouse. "They never wanted to live in your apartment," Harrison said, echoing my exact thoughts. "They do not care about the square footage or the nursery. They needed your signature on a quitclaim deed to transfer the title into your father's name. They wanted to leverage the asset," I whispered, my voice completely cold. "Exactly," Harrison said, leaning back in his chair with a look of dark triumph. "Your penthouse is a fully paid-off property worth $1.5 million in prime city real estate. It is a massive, pristine, unencumbered asset. If you had caved to their emotional blackmail and signed that deed over to them, your father would have immediately walked straight to the bank and taken out a massive home equity line of credit against your property. He would have used your life savings to pay off his own defaulted mortgage and save his house from foreclosure. They were going to steal my home to save theirs." My father had looked me in the eye and filed a public lawsuit, perfectly willing to render his own daughter homeless, just to cover up the fact that he had bankrupted himself, bailing out a fraudster. They had tried to socially execute me on the internet, painting me as a barren, selfish monster, all to obscure the fact that they were orchestrating a $1.5 million heist against their own flesh and blood. I looked down at the thick black binder of evidence. The panic my father had been projecting in his unhinged voicemails suddenly made perfect sense. He was not angry about my disrespect. He was a desperate drowning man grasping at the only piece of driftwood left in the ocean, and he was absolutely furious that I refused to drown in his place. Harrison watched my face closely. The 14-day deadline Arthur Mitchell set was an artificial panic button. They were trying to terrify you into surrendering the deed quickly because the bank is foreclosing on your father in 30 days. They needed your equity to stop the clock. By filing this partition lawsuit yesterday, your father has officially committed perjury by claiming equitable interest in an asset he knows he holds no financial stake in. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. The lingering threads of familial guilt I had carried for the past 2 weeks completely evaporated, replaced by an armor of absolute freezing resolve. Draft the countersuit. Harrison, I commanded, standing up and smoothing out my blazer. File for immediate dismissal of their partition claim with extreme prejudice. Attach the entire forensic financial trail proving my father's insolvency and Jamal's fraudulent debts. Then I want you to file a secondary lawsuit for targeted harassment, extortion, and defamation. Harrison smiled, uncapping his fountain pen. And what about your father's pending foreclosure? I looked at the panoramic view of the city, feeling lighter and more powerful than I ever had in my entire life. Let the bank take the house. We are going to let them all burn. I watched Harrison's predatory smile widen. He closed the thick black binder and neatly aligned it with the edge of his mahogany desk. We spent the next 2 hours mapping out the exact architecture of the trap. A simple refusal was no longer sufficient. A mailed cease and desist letter would only provoke my father into filing more frivolous motions to delay his inevitable bankruptcy. I needed them all in one room. I needed them arrogant, overconfident, and completely off guard. Most importantly, I needed Arthur Mitchell, their aggressive attack dog of a lawyer, to be present when I detonated the bomb. Mitchell had staked his professional reputation on this partition lawsuit, clearly unaware that his client was hiding $500,000 in fraudulent debt. I walked out of Harrison's office and stepped into the elevator. As the door slid shut, I pulled my phone from my purse. I opened the family group chat that I had kept muted for the past 14 days. The chat log was a digital graveyard of emotional abuse. Scrolling back through the timeline, I saw my father's aggressive legal threats, my mother's passive-aggressive guilt trips, and Bethany's melodramatic updates about the stress of housing insecurity. It was a masterclass in coordinated manipulation. I tapped the text field and typed a single, carefully constructed sentence. I have considered the legal threat. Let us meet at Mitchell's office on Friday at 10 in the morning to discuss the deed transfer. I hit send, slipped the phone back into my purse, and walked out into the crisp morning air. I did not even make it to my waiting car before my phone began vibrating with frantic intensity. Sitting in the back of my town car, I pulled the phone out and observed the immediate, sickeningly rapid 180-degree shift in their tone. The whiplash was actually dizzying. The people who had spent the last 2 weeks threatening to destroy my business, ruin my credit score, and drag my name through the mud had suddenly transformed back into a warm, loving television family. My mother was the first to reply. She sent a barrage of prayer hand emojis, followed by a long paragraph about the power of forgiveness. God always answers prayers, she wrote. I knew you would not let your family down, Clara. We are so proud of your maturity today. Family always comes first. The hypocrisy was so thick, I could practically choke on it. This was the same woman who had silently co-signed my father's plan to steal my $1.5 million asset to cover up his own spectacular financial failures. She was praising my maturity while actively participating in an extortion ring. Bethany's response arrived 30 seconds later. I am literally crying right now, she texted, adding multiple heart emojis. I knew my big sister would do the right thing. Jamal and I are so relieved. The baby is kicking like crazy. I think she knows she is going to have a beautiful new nursery. Thank you, Clara. You are saving us. I stared at the screen, my jaw clenching. Bethany was not thanking me for a house. She was thanking me for a massive home equity line of credit. She knew exactly what Jamal's gambling had done to them. She knew my father was 30 days away from losing his house. Her relief was not about a nursery. It was the frantic relief of a scam artist realizing the mark had finally agreed to write the check. Finally, my father chimed in. His message was brief, patronizing, and utterly devoid of any accountability for his previous vitriol. Arthur Mitchell will have the paperwork ready for your signature on Friday, he wrote. You made the smart choice, Clara. We will see you then. There was no apology for the vicious, misogynistic voicemails. There was no acknowledgement of the coordinated smear campaign they had launched against my agency. In their minds, my surrender simply validated their tactics. They believed they had successfully bullied the ungrateful barren career woman into submitting to the patriarchal hierarchy. They thought my silence over the past 2 weeks was proof that I was cowering in fear, desperately trying to figure out how to give up my property without losing face. They genuinely believed they had won. Over the next 3 days, my phone became a hub of sickeningly sweet family interactions. My mother texted me daily to ask if I wanted to get lunch after the signing on Friday. She suggested my favorite Italian restaurant downtown, acting as if we were just finalizing a routine paperwork adjustment rather than the forced surrender of my life savings. Bethany sent me links to baby registries, casually mentioning that since I was saving them so much money on housing, I might want to buy the expensive imported stroller she had her eye on. I responded to none of it. I maintained my absolute radio silence, allowing their delusion to grow unchecked. Every unanswered text only made them more confident. They interpreted my silence as quiet resignation. Behind the scenes, the reality was entirely different. I spent those 3 days working directly with Harrison and his forensic accountant, David. We were not preparing a quitclaim deed. We were preparing 3 identical thick black binders. Each binder was a chronological masterpiece of financial destruction. Section 1 contained the irrefutable proof of Jamal's illegal sports betting and fraudulent commercial loan applications. Section 2 contained the property records for my parents' home, highlighting the massive secondary mortgage my father had secretly taken out 12 months ago, followed by the active notice of default from the bank. Section 3 contained the complete operational records of my LLC, proving definitively that every single cent of the Penthouse payoff came from my personal business accounts. The final section was the killing blow. It contained a fully drafted, ready-to-file countersuit against Richard, Jamal, and Bethany for extortion-targeted harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It also included a draft of a formal complaint to the State Bar Association regarding Arthur Mitchell's ethical violations in pursuing a fraudulent partition lawsuit without verifying his client's equitable interest. On Thursday evening, I sat at my kitchen island in the penthouse they thought they were taking from me. I poured a glass of Cabernet and reviewed the final digital copies of the binders. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the polished marble countertops. My father wanted to strip me of this sanctuary to remind me of my place. He wanted to use my hard-earned stability to plug the sinking holes in his own massive ego. My phone lit up with one final text from my father. Do not be late tomorrow, Clara. Mitchell charges by the hour. I took a slow sip of wine, letting the smooth vintage warm my throat. I was not going to be late. I was going to arrive precisely on time, and I was going to bring the entire crumbling facade of their wealthy, untouchable family crashing down onto their heads. They had spent the last month building a house of cards on a foundation of lies, gambling debts, and predatory extortion. Friday morning was going to be a demolition. The glow of the city skyline reflected off the polished marble of my kitchen island. I was just closing the digital files Harrison had sent over when my phone vibrated against the stone surface. The caller ID flashed my father's name. He was not the type of man to leave things to chance. My text message agreeing to the meeting had given him the green light he desperately needed, but his paranoia required verbal confirmation. He needed to hear my voice. He needed to assess my tone to ensure I was truly submitting. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the glass to answer. Clara. My father said, his voice dripping with a thick, syrupy warmth that made the hair on my arms stand up. I am so glad I caught you. I kept my voice entirely neutral, giving him nothing to work with. Hello, Dad. I just wanted to call and say how proud I am of you. He continued, perfectly adopting the tone of a benevolent patriarch, resolving a minor dispute. Your mother and I were talking about it over dinner. We know this has been a stressful few weeks, but you stepping up like this to help your sister shows real character. It shows that you finally understand what being part of this family truly means. The sheer audacity of his performance was almost impressive. He was staring down the barrel of a devastating foreclosure, secretly drowning in nearly $500,000 of toxic debt, and he was still trying to play the wise, forgiving father. He genuinely believed I was entirely oblivious to his financial ruin. I am glad we are finally on the same page, I replied smoothly. We absolutely are, he agreed, his relief palpable even through the speaker. Now about tomorrow morning. Arthur has all the paperwork drafted. It is a very standard quitclaim deed. We will get you in and out of there in 20 minutes so you can get back to your agency. You know how highly I value your professional time. He paused, and I knew exactly what was coming next. The pivot. The casual, seemingly helpful suggestion designed to strip me of my defenses. There is really no need for you to bring your own legal counsel to this meeting, Clara, he said, his tone shifting to one of practical fatherly advice. Arthur is handling the transaction for the family. Bringing your own attorney will just complicate a simple transfer and cost you thousands in unnecessary billable hours. We are all family here. Arthur can facilitate the paperwork for both of us. Let me save you the money. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. He was asking me to walk into a shark tank covered in blood, and he was framing it as a favor. He wanted me unrepresented, unprotected, and completely isolated in Arthur Mitchell's conference room. He needed me legally blind so I would not ask questions about why the deed transfer was structured to funnel the asset directly into his control rather than Bethany's. I remained silent for a fraction of a second too long, and he rushed to fill the void with his favorite weapon. Guilt. This is what family does, Clara, he lectured gently, leaning heavily into the gaslighting. We protect each other. We make sacrifices for the greater good. Your sister needs this stability for her child. I am sacrificing my time and resources to facilitate this, and you are sacrificing an asset you do not truly need, so the next generation can thrive. That is the beauty of family. We endure temporary discomfort to ensure everyone succeeds. His words triggered a visceral reaction, pulling a razor-sharp memory to the forefront of my mind. It was a memory I had buried under years of corporate success, but his hollow speech about sacrifice brought it back with pristine clarity. I gripped the edge of the marble counter. Sacrifice, I repeated, letting the word hang in the cold air of my penthouse. That is an interesting word choice, Dad. What do you mean? He asked, a tiny sliver of uncertainty finally entering his voice. I am just thinking about your definition of sacrifice, I said, my tone dropping 10 degrees, slicing through his fake warmth with surgical precision. I am thinking about the summer before my junior year of college. I am thinking about how I sat in your leather office chair and begged you to simply co-sign a student loan so I could finish my degree. I was working 30 hours a week, waiting tables, maintaining a perfect grade point average, and I was exactly $5,000 short on tuition. The line went dead silent. Do you remember what you told me that day, Dad? I asked, the ice in my voice crystallizing. You looked me right in the eye and told me that teaching me financial independence was the greatest sacrifice a father could make. You said handing me money would ruin my work ethic. You let me walk out of your office sobbing, completely terrified that I would have to drop out of school. Clara, that was a long time ago, he stammered, the paternal facade cracking rapidly. I was trying to teach you. You were trying to teach me a lesson, I interrupted smoothly, entirely unbothered by his panic. Yes, I remember. The lesson became very clear exactly 3 days later when Bethany threw a tantrum because her boyfriend broke up with her. You bought her a brand new, fully loaded Mercedes-Benz to cheer her up. You handed her the keys to a $60,000 luxury vehicle while I was literally selling my textbooks to afford groceries. He breathed heavily into the receiver, completely stripped of his arrogant script. He had no defense for it. He never did. So please, I continued, my voice practically radiating calm professional menace. Do not ever speak to me about family sacrifice again. You do not know the meaning of the word. You only know how to cannibalize the people around you to feed your own ego. Clara, listen to me. He demanded, his voice hardening into the familiar aggressive tone he used when he was losing control. You agreed to this meeting. We have an arrangement. Do not try to back out now. Arthur will have the documents ready. I smiled, picking up my glass of wine. I am not backing out, Dad. I will be at Arthur Mitchell's office at exactly 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. I am looking forward to it. Are you bringing a lawyer? He demanded, all pretense of fatherly concern entirely abandoned. I took a slow sip of the Cabernet, enjoying the absolute desperation radiating through the phone. Do not worry, Dad, I replied softly. I will bring my own pen. I ended the call before he could say another word. I set the phone face down on the counter and took a deep breath. The air in my apartment felt cleaner, sharper. For years, I had allowed my family to dictate the terms of our engagement. I had played the role of the quiet, successful daughter who absorbed their slights and swallowed their insults just to maintain a fragile, toxic peace. I had let them diminish my achievements and weaponize my independence. That era was officially over. I walked into my master bedroom and opened my expansive walk-in closet. I needed to select the perfect armor for tomorrow's execution. I bypassed the standard conservative business suits I typically wore to client meetings. Tomorrow was not a negotiation. It was a hostile takeover. I pulled out a tailored, razor-sharp suit in deep crimson. It was aggressive, unapologetic, and screamed absolute financial dominance. I paired it with a pair of black stiletto pumps and the vintage Cartier watch I had bought for myself the day I fully paid off my penthouse mortgage. I was going to walk into Arthur Mitchell's office looking like the $1.5 million asset they were trying to steal. I laid the outfit meticulously over the velvet chaise lounge in the corner of my bedroom. Then I walked back out to the living room and gathered the 3 thick black binders Harrison had prepared. I stacked them neatly by the front door next to my designer handbag. They contained every single lie, every fraudulent loan, and every desperate illegal maneuver my father and Jamal had executed over the past 2 years. They contained the absolute destruction of the family hierarchy my father had spent his entire life building. My phone lit up again on the kitchen island. Another text from my mother. It was a single anxious question. Is everything okay with your father? He seems upset. I stared at the glowing screen for a moment, marveling at her endless capacity for willful ignorance. She was sleeping in a house that the bank was actively preparing to seize, married to a man who had gambled away their entire future, and she was still trying to manage his mood swings. I did not reply. The time for digital skirmishes was over. I turned off the lights in the kitchen, leaving only the city skyline to illuminate the penthouse. I felt a profound, untouchable sense of calm wash over me. The anxiety that had plagued me since Arthur Mitchell's first extortion letter arrived was completely gone. I was no longer the victim of their coordinated harassment. I was the architect of their impending ruin. They had demanded a family meeting to discuss a deed transfer. Tomorrow morning, they were going to get exactly what they asked for. The heavy, polished doors of Harrison's firm clicked shut behind me at exactly 6 on Friday morning. My crimson suit felt less like fabric and more like armor specifically chosen to project absolute financial dominance. Harrison and David were already entrenched in the main conference room, surrounded by illuminated monitors and stacks of high-bond legal paper. The scent of dark roast coffee and printer ink hung thick in the air. "Are we ready?" I asked, setting my handbag on a leather chair. Harrison looked up, a lethal predatory gleam in his eyes. "We are beyond ready, Clara. We are actively salting the earth." He slid a freshly printed, staple-bound document across the polished wood table. The cover page read, "Quiet Title Action," in bold black lettering. "Your father made a catastrophic miscalculation when he formally filed that partition lawsuit," Harrison explained, tapping the document with his silver pen. He relied on the fact that his name remained on the original mortgage documents as a secondary guarantor. but by legally asserting that he holds an equitable interest in your penthouse to force a public sale, he has given us the exact jurisdiction we need to file a quiet title action. I picked up the document, scanning the dense legal text. Explain the execution. A quiet title. Action is a legal guillotine, David interjected from behind his laptop. It asks the court to definitively rule on the true ownership of a property, stripping away any phantom claims, liens, or historical garbage. We are asking a judge to legally sever your father from this deed forever. But we are not stopping there. David turned his monitor toward me. He had pulled up the original loan origination documents from a decade ago. Look at this specific clause, David instructed. When you first bought the penthouse, your father insisted on attaching himself as a guarantor. He claimed you needed his financial backing to secure a favorable interest rate because you were a young single woman. But the forensic audit proves his debt-to-income ratio was already deteriorating back then. His inclusion actually raised your interest rate by 0.5%. He did not do it to help you, Clara. He attached himself to your assets specifically so he could use your penthouse as a phantom collateral buffer for his own commercial lending applications. The realization hit me with a sickening thud. The financial manipulation had not started with Bethany's pregnancy. It had started the day I achieved enough success to buy my own property. He had planted a flag on my hard-earned sanctuary to artificially inflate his own net worth. And now Harrison picked up the thread, his voice dropping to a freezing calm. We are going to expose that initial manipulation, tie it directly to his current foreclosure crisis, and hit him with attempted mortgage fraud. He is trying to force a partition sale under the guise of an emotional family conflict to artificially extract equity he never contributed. That is extortion. I ran my hand over the thick, crisp pages of the quiet title action. My father had spent his entire life operating under the assumption that I would simply fold to avoid conflict. He had weaponized my desire for family peace. He thought the mere threat of a public lawsuit would terrify me into signing over my home. Pack it all up, I commanded, setting the document down. I want every single piece of paper indexed and tabbed. David moved with mechanical efficiency. He began assembling the 3 identical black binders we had outlined the night before. Binder 1 snapped shut. It contained the complete unredacted financial autopsy of Jamal. The illegal offshore sports betting records, the defaulted commercial leases, the active IRS audit notices, and the massive credit card debt currently in collections. It was the absolute destruction of Bethany's husband printed on high-gloss paper. Binder 2 snapped shut. It contained my father's ruin. The home equity line of credit he had secretly taken out against my childhood home to bail Jamal out a year ago. The missed payments, the plummeting commercial real estate portfolio, and sitting right on top the active 30-day notice of default from his primary mortgage lender. It was the undeniable proof that the wealthy, untouchable patriarch was actually a bankrupt fraud. Binder 3 snapped shut. The legal payload, the quiet title action. The countersuit for extortion, targeted harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And finally, the meticulously drafted complaint to the State Bar Association targeting Arthur Mitchell. Mitchell has built his entire boutique firm on aggressive intimidation tactics, Harrison noted, sliding the binders into a heavy leather briefcase. He assumed you were a financially illiterate, easily cowed daughter. He did not bother to verify his client's financial standing because your father paid him a massive retainer up front, likely using the last of his available credit. Mitchell filed a frivolous partition lawsuit to facilitate a fraudulent equity grab. When I hand him this bar complaint, he is going to realize that continuing to represent your father will cost him his license to practice law. I checked my vintage Cartier watch. It was exactly 9:20 in the morning. The meeting was scheduled for 10. Let us go, I said, picking up my handbag. I want to be sitting in his conference room before they even arrive. We took Harrison's private car to Arthur Mitchell's firm. The drive through the downtown financial district was a quiet, focused procession. I watched the city blur past the tinted windows, feeling a profound sense of detachment from the family that was about to walk into my line of fire. The anxiety, The guilt, the desperate childhood need for their approval, it was all gone, burned away by the sheer magnitude of their betrayal. Arthur Mitchell's law firm was located on the 42nd floor of a glass skyscraper. It was designed to intimidate. The reception area was an expanse of cold white marble chrome fixtures and aggressively modern leather seating. It was the kind of office that screamed billable hours and ruthless litigation. We walked through the heavy glass doors at exactly 9:40. We were 20 minutes early. The receptionist, a young woman wearing a headset and a sharply tailored blazer, looked up in surprise. She clearly had not expected anyone to bypass security this early. Clara Wilson and Harrison Vance. Harrison stated, his voice carrying the effortless authority of a man who owned the building. We are here for the 10 o'clock deed transfer meeting with Arthur Mitchell, Richard Wilson, and Jamal Carter. The receptionist blinked, her fingers flying across her keyboard. I am sorry, Mr. Vance. Mr. Mitchell is not expecting you until 10. He is currently reviewing files in his office and the other parties have not yet arrived. That is perfectly fine, Harrison replied with a terrifyingly polite smile. We will wait in the primary conference room. She hesitated, clearly intimidated by Harrison's commanding presence and my freezing, unyielding posture. She picked up her desk phone and murmured a few words, then stood up with a nervous nod. Right this way, please. She led us down a long, glass-walled corridor and pushed open the doors to a massive corner conference room. A long, polished mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by heavy leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the city below. Harrison walked directly to the head of the table, bypassing the chairs clearly intended for guests. He placed the heavy leather briefcase on the polished wood with a solid, echoing thud. He pulled out the 3 black binders and arranged them in a perfectly aligned row in front of him. I took the seat immediately to his right. I smoothed the skirt of my crimson suit, crossed my legs, and folded my hands on the table. I looked at the 3 binders, then out at the sprawling city skyline. We did not speak. The silence in the room was heavy, dense, and absolute. We were no longer reacting to their chaotic threats. We had claimed the high ground, dictated the battlefield, and loaded the weapons. The trap was set. All we had to do now was wait for them to walk in. The heavy mahogany door to the conference room swung open at precisely 10 o'clock. Arthur Mitchell entered first. He was exactly the type of attorney I expected my father to hire. He wore a navy pinstripe suit that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, a shiny gold tie clip, and an expression of arrogant, practiced boredom. He carried a single thin manila folder. The absolute sheer hubris of bringing one flimsy folder to a corporate execution was almost poetic. Close behind him was the procession of my family, walking in like they were taking a victory lap after winning the lottery. My father led the pack, his chest puffed out, radiating the benevolent authority of a king who had just crushed a minor peasant rebellion. He was wearing his favorite charcoal suit, the one he wore when he wanted to project unshakable wealth. My mother fluttered in next, holding a brand new, oversized luxury shopping bag from a high-end boutique down the street. She had apparently spent the morning burning through the last remnants of my father's credit limit. She was already chattering to Bethany about a new brunch spot she wanted to try after we finished this tedious little errand. Then came Bethany and Jamal. Bethany looked like she had stepped directly out of a wealthy suburban lifestyle magazine. She was draped in a cream-colored, pure silk designer maternity dress that easily cost $3,000. A pristine butter soft leather Birkin bag hung from her forearm. She was glowing with the radiant, unearned confidence of a woman who believed she had just successfully bullied her way into a $1.5 million real estate upgrade. Jamal trailed behind her, the absolute picture of a successful entrepreneur. He wore a custom-tailored linen blazer and a heavy, diamond-encrusted watch that caught the sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. As he made eye contact with me, his lips curled into a slow, incredibly smug smile. He gave me a single victorious nod. It was the nod of a man who thought he had just secured the ultimate bailout, entirely unaware that the federal government was actively circling his offshore bank accounts. I sat perfectly still in my crimson suit, my hands folded neatly over the edge of the glass table. Next to me, Harrison Vance did not so much as blink. He simply observed them with the cold, unblinking focus of a sniper finding his mark. "Well," Arthur Mitchell boomed, his voice echoing in the large room. He tossed his single manila folder onto the center of the table and took his place at the head directly opposite Harrison and me. "I am glad we could all get together and resolve this matter amicably." My father pulled out a chair for my mother, then took the seat next to Mitchell. He finally turned his attention to my side of the table, his eyes locking onto Harrison. The patriarchal smile on his face faltered for a fraction of a second as his brain tried to process the presence of an unknown man. "Clara," my father said, his voice dripping with forced patronizing warmth. "I see you brought a friend. I thought we agreed yesterday that bringing outside counsel was an unnecessary expense. Arthur is perfectly capable of handling the transfer for both parties." Harrison did not stand up. He did not offer his hand. He simply leaned back in his leather chair and let his predatory gaze drift over my father. "I am not a friend," Richard Harrison stated, his voice a low, perfectly modulated rumble that immediately sucked the warmth out of the room. "I am Harrison Vance, senior partner at Vance, Sterling and Croft. I represent Clara in all personal and corporate legal matters." I watched Arthur Mitchell's spine suddenly snap rigid. The bored arrogance completely vanished from his face. Vance, Sterling and Croft was not a boutique family law firm. It was a massive, notoriously aggressive corporate litigation powerhouse. Mitchell knew exactly who Harrison was, and he knew instantly that Harrison did not handle simple family real estate transfers. Mitchell cleared his throat, adjusting his gold tie clip with sudden nervousness. "Mr. Vance, I was not informed that opposing counsel would be present. This was intended to be an informal settlement meeting." "There is nothing informal about real estate extortion," Mr. Mitchell Harrison replied smoothly, his tone entirely conversational. "Please proceed with your presentation. We are very interested in seeing what you have brought us today." My father shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the shift in the room's power dynamic, but too arrogant to understand the danger. He shot me a look of deep disappointment, playing the wounded parent. "Clara, you are making this needlessly complicated," my father scolded gently. "We are family. We do not need corporate sharks sitting at the table to handle a simple property adjustment. Bethany needs to get off her feet, so let us just get this done." Bethany immediately placed a hand on her stomach and sighed, playing her part perfectly. "I am just so glad we are finally putting this ugliness behind us," she murmured, looking at me with wide, forgiving eyes. "I know you were upset at first, Clara, but Jamal and I really appreciate you coming to your senses. The baby deserves a stable home. I knew you would do the right thing once you thought about it." Jamal leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "We really do appreciate the sacrifice, Clara. We know giving up the penthouse is a big adjustment for you, but family has to look out for family." The absolute sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Jamal was sitting 3 feet away from a binder containing the financial records of his illegal sports betting empire, thanking me for sacrificing my home to cover his federal crimes. He was looking me right in the eye, perfectly comfortable playing the grateful, responsible father-to-be. I did not say a word. I simply held his gaze, my expression completely blank, until his smug smile began to waver at the edges. Mitchell opened his manila folder. He pulled out a crisp, white legal document and smoothed it flat on the mahogany table. It was a direct, horrifying mirror of the opening scene from 2 weeks ago, when my father had ambushed me in his study with the initial demand. But the context had entirely changed. I was no longer the blindsided daughter desperately seeking my parents' approval. I held every single card, and I was about to force them to fold. "This is a standard quitclaim deed," Mitchell explained, his voice sounding slightly less confident than it had 5 minutes ago. He pushed the document across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of me, right next to the 3 black binders. "The terms are exactly as discussed." Mitchell continued, tapping the top page. "You are voluntarily transferring the deed of the property into your father's name. In exchange for your signature today, my client has agreed to formally withdraw the partition lawsuit currently filed in civil court." We will also draft a binding agreement stating that you will be permitted to reside in the property for exactly 30 days to arrange your relocation rent-free. He offered this 30-day grace period as if it were a magnificent, unprecedented act of charity. This is the best possible outcome for everyone, Clara Mitchell said, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the table. If we proceed with the partition lawsuit, your property will be locked in litigation for months. The court will ultimately force a public auction. You will lose the penthouse anyway, and the legal fees will completely drain whatever equity you manage to walk away with. Your father is offering you a clean, quiet exit. My mother chimed in, adjusting her diamond earrings. We just want peace, Clara. Your father has been losing sleep over this conflict. It is time to act like an adult and fulfill your obligations to this family. My father nodded gravely. I am doing this to protect you from yourself, Clara. You are too emotional to manage an asset of this size. Sign the deed. We will drop the lawsuit. Bethany gets her nursery, and you can move on with your life. We can all go to lunch and celebrate putting this family back together. Mitchell reached into his breast pocket and produced a heavy silver fountain pen. He laid it gently on top of the quitclaim deed. Just sign on the bottom line, Clara Mitchell instructed softly. I looked down at the document. It was literally a piece of paper demanding the surrender of my entire life savings, backed by a fraudulent legal threat, orchestrated by a father trying to save himself from bankruptcy, and cheered on by a sister married to a compulsive gambler. I looked at the silver pen. Then I looked up, letting my gaze slowly travel from Jamal's fading smile to Bethany's expectant face, to my mother's shallow impatience, and finally settling on my father's demanding, authoritative stare. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I reached out and placed my hand flat on top of the first thick black binder. Let us talk about your definition of an adult obligation, Dad. The refusal. My hand rested lightly on the thick leather cover of the first binder. I did not even glance at the silver fountain pen Arthur Mitchell had so confidently slid across the mahogany table. Instead, I pushed it back toward him with a single manicured finger. The metal scraped softly against the polished wood, the only sound in the suddenly breathless room. I shifted my gaze entirely away from my father and focused solely on Arthur Mitchell. His arrogant, bored expression was beginning to fracture, replaced by the cautious wariness of a lawyer who suddenly realizes the opposing side is not holding a white flag. Mr. Mitchell, I said, my voice projecting crisp, absolute authority. Before we discuss any signatures, I have a very specific legal question for you. As an officer of the court, are you fully aware of what your clients intend to do with this $1.5 million property the exact moment this quitclaim deed is executed? Mitchell frowned. He glanced at my father, then back to me, adjusting his gold tie clip in a gesture that betrayed his growing discomfort. The intent of this transfer is to settle a family partition dispute amicably, Mitchell replied, defaulting to practiced legalese. My clients intend to utilize the property as a primary residence for your sister and her growing family. It is a straightforward residential transfer designed to provide housing. I let a cold, razor-sharp smile touch my lips. I looked at Harrison, who was watching Mitchell with the quiet amusement of a predator observing cornered prey. A primary residence, I repeated, letting the words echo in the expansive conference room. I turned my attention directly to Bethany. Is that right, Bethany? You and Jamal are planning to move your entire lives into my downtown penthouse? You are planning to set up a nursery in the middle of the financial district, miles away from your beloved suburban country clubs. Bethany shifted in her chair, adjusting the strap of her pristine Birkin bag. She shot a nervous look at Jamal. Of course we are, Clara. We need the space. You are being completely unreasonable by dragging this out. Housing, I said, turning back to Mitchell. Your client told you they need housing. They did not happen to mention the word collateral during your intake consultations. The patriarch's panic. My father slammed his open palm onto the table. The sudden violent sound echoed like a gunshot, causing my mother to jump in her seat. That is enough, Clara, my father barked, his face flushing a dangerous mottled red. The mask of the benevolent, forgiving patriarch completely disintegrated, revealing the desperate, cornered man underneath. This is none of your business. What we do with the property after you sign is entirely up to us. You are signing that document right now, or I swear to God I will authorize Arthur to file the partition suit this afternoon. He leaned over the table, pointing a thick finger directly at my face, attempting to use the physical intimidation that had always worked when I was a child. I will sue you for everything you have, my father threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious, guttural snarl. I will take the penthouse. I will drag your boutique agency into a protracted legal battle that will bankrupt your operational accounts. I will bury you in so many discovery motions and legal fees that you will be begging me to take the deed just to stop the bleeding. Sign the damn paper. The room fell dead silent. My mother was clutching her new designer shopping bag against her chest like a shield. Jamal was sitting rigidly, his smug demeanor evaporating into tense caution. Bethany was staring at our father, slightly shocked by the sheer venom in his voice. They were used to him bullying me in private, but seeing him explode in a formal law office was new territory. Arthur Mitchell looked genuinely alarmed. He held up a hand, trying to de-escalate his own client. "Richard, please. Let us keep this professional." Mitchell turned back to me, attempting to salvage his easy victory. "Ms. Wilson, I highly suggest you listen to reason. Your father's legal claim to the property is documented. Defending a partition action will cost you tens of thousands of dollars, and the court will likely force a sale anyway. I have structured this settlement to save you from complete financial ruin. Do not let pride cloud your judgment." The trap springs. I did not break eye contact with my father. His chest was heaving beneath his expensive charcoal suit, and sweat was beginning to bead along his hairline. He was projecting sheer dominant aggression, completely unaware that he was standing on a landmine. I leaned back in my chair, perfectly mirroring Harrison's relaxed, untouchable posture. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, absolute calm that commanded the entire room. "This is an issue of complete financial ruin, just not mine." I did not raise my voice. I did not look at Mitchell or my mother. I simply raised my right hand and gave Harrison a single subtle nod. Harrison unclasped his hands. He reached forward and placed his palm flat against the cover of the first black binder. "Mr. Mitchell," Harrison began, his voice cutting through the tension like a scythe, "before you officially attach your name and your firm's reputation to this quitclaim deed, I highly recommend you review the financial disclosures your client conveniently forgot to mention during your strategy meetings." Mitchell's brow furrowed. "Financial disclosures. This is a simple property dispute regarding a secondary guarantor on an initial mortgage. My client's current financials are irrelevant to his equitable claim." "They are entirely relevant when your client is actively committing mortgage fraud to cover up massive illegal insolvency," Harrison countered smoothly. The color drained instantly from Mitchell's face. The word fraud hung in the air, a toxic radioactive cloud that no lawyer wanted to breathe in. "What the hell are you talking about?" my father yelled, attempting to stand up. "Do not listen to them, Arthur. They are bluffing. They are trying to scare you. This is a delay tactic." "Sit down, Richard." Mitchell snapped, his own voice suddenly sharp and panicked. An attorney's ultimate nightmare is a client who lies to them, and Mitchell was a veteran litigator. He knew the scent of a trap. He looked at Harrison. "Explain yourself, Mr. Vance." Harrison flipped open the first binder. He extracted a thick stack of bank statements and commercial loan documents, all meticulously highlighted in bright neon yellow. He did not hand them to my father. He slid them directly across the mahogany table to Arthur Mitchell. "Let us start with the beneficiaries of this little family charity project," Harrison stated, looking directly at Jamal. "Your client, Richard Wilson, claims he needs this $1.5 million property to house his pregnant daughter and her husband. He claims they need a fresh start. What he failed to tell you, Mr. Mitchell, is why they need a fresh start." I watched Jamal's hands clench into tight fists on the table. The diamond watch caught the light as his knuckles went white. Bethany looked back and forth between her husband and the lawyer, genuine confusion masking her perfectly contoured face. "Jamal Carter is not an entrepreneur." Harrison continued, his tone entirely conversational, but utterly devastating. "He is a compulsive gambler who has currently accrued over $420,000 in toxic debt. The documents you are holding, Mr. Mitchell, contain the wire transfer records proving Mr. Carter has been funneling fraudulent commercial business loans directly into illegal offshore sports betting accounts. Bethany gasped a sharp, ragged sound that echoed in the quiet room. She turned to Jamal, her eyes wide with shock. Jamal, what is he talking about? You told my father the business loans were for the new logistics startup. Jamal did not look at her. He stared at the documents in Mitchell's hands, his jaw locked, his entire body rigid with terror. The smug, victorious aura he had worn into the room was completely gone, replaced by the sheer panic of a man watching his entire life burn to the ground. Mitchell was rapidly flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning the highlighted sections. His professional detachment was entirely gone. He was reading proof of federal wire fraud, and he realized he was sitting in a room with a man who could trigger a federal indictment. "This is irrelevant!" my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table again, though his voice lacked its previous thunder. "Jamal's business debts have nothing to do with my claim to Clara's apartment. I am the secondary guarantor. I have a legal right to force a sale. Arthur, stop reading that garbage and hand Clara the pen." Mitchell slowly looked up from the documents. He did not look at my father. He looked at Harrison. "You have more, do you not?" Mitchell said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its previous arrogance. "Oh." Harrison smiled, a terrifying shark-like expression. "We have so much more." I looked at my father. His chest was rising and falling rapidly. He was staring at the second black binder on the table, finally realizing that the ground beneath his feet was completely hollow. He had walked into this room expecting to execute a swift, brutal extortion. He had no idea he was already standing on the gallows. Harrison Vance did not wait for my father to recover his breath or his composure. Moving with the calculated, unhurried precision of a surgeon about to make the final fatal incision, Harrison reached back into his heavy leather briefcase. He extracted a thick spiral-bound document. It landed on the mahogany table with a solid, definitive thud that seemed to rattle the crystal water glasses. Harrison placed his hand flat on the cover and slid the 50-page forensic accounting report directly across the polished wood. It stopped exactly 1 inch from Arthur Mitchell's silver fountain pen. "Please take your time." Mr. Mitchell Harrison offered, his voice a low, terrifying hum. "I suggest you pay special attention to Section 4. It details the exact routing numbers Jamal Carter used to funnel his commercial loans into offshore gambling syndicates. It is remarkably thorough reading." Arthur Mitchell stared at the document as if it were a live explosive. He did not touch it immediately. He looked at Jamal, then at my father, the practiced arrogance completely draining from his features, leaving only the stark, pale realization of a lawyer who had just walked blindly into a federal trap. I turned my attention away from the attorneys. I looked directly across the table at my sister. Bethany was clutching her expensive leather handbag against her stomach. Her perfect, glowing complexion had dissolved into an ashen mask of pure panic. She was staring at Jamal, waiting for him to laugh, waiting for him to dismiss Harrison's claims as a ridiculous bluff. But Jamal was silent. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle twitched rapidly in his cheek. "You do not want a nursery, Bethany?" I stated, my voice echoing in the absolute silence of the conference room. It was not a shout. It was a cold, razor-sharp blade slicing straight through the illusion she had spent her entire adult life curating. "You want a bank. You and Jamal are $420,000 in debt." Bethany gasped, physically recoiling in her heavy leather chair. She shook her head rapidly, her meticulously styled hair falling across her face. "That is a lie." Bethany stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "Jamal, tell her she is lying. Tell them about the logistics company. Tell them about the new warehouse lease." Jamal did not comfort his pregnant wife. He did not reassure her. Instead, the sheer terror in his eyes morphed into an explosive, cornered rage. He slammed both hands down on the table and launched himself out of his chair, towering over the glass surface. "This is illegal!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He pointed a shaking finger directly at Harrison. "You hacked my accounts. You illegally accessed my private financial data. That is a federal crime. I am going to have you disbarred and thrown in prison. You cannot use stolen documents in a civil settlement. Privacy laws protect me from this exact type of corporate espionage." Harrison did not even blink. He looked up at Jamal with the mild clinical interest of a scientist observing an insect under a microscope. "Sit down," Mr. Carter Harrison instructed, his tone entirely devoid of emotion. "Nothing in that binder required a hack. It is astonishing what a team of forensic accountants can legally uncover when a man is arrogant enough to use a single shell company to manage his commercial loans, his personal mortgage, and his illegal offshore betting accounts. Every single wire transfer left a digital footprint in the public domain. Your financial negligence is almost as staggering as your hubris." Jamal opened his mouth to shout again, but the words died in his throat. He looked at Mitchell, desperate for legal cover, but Mitchell was already aggressively flipping through the pages of the report, his eyes scanning the highlighted columns of figures with mounting horror. I did not let the silence hold. I turned my attention to the head of the table. My father was staring at me, his chest heaving, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He looked like a man who was simultaneously experiencing a heart attack and a profound crisis of reality. The daughter he had spent 35 years conditioning to be compliant, silent, and entirely subservient was currently dismantling his empire piece by piece. "And Dad," I said, raising my voice to dominate the room, ensuring that every single syllable struck with maximum impact. "You leveraged Mom's house to cover his fraud." My mother, who had been sitting in stunned, terrified silence, suddenly jolted upright. She dropped her luxury shopping bag. It tipped over, spilling a pristine, tissue-wrapped designer sweater onto the floor. "Richard," my mother demanded, her voice climbing an octave. "Richard, what is she talking about? What did you do to the house?" I did not let him answer. I kept my eyes locked onto his, refusing to give him a single inch of breathing room. "You took out a massive home equity line of credit against your primary residence to bail Jamal out a year ago." I continued, the truth pouring out like acid. "You thought you could cover his tracks and protect the family image. But Jamal kept gambling, and you kept paying. You drained your own liquidity, and now you are 30 days from foreclosure." My father gripped the edges of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. He opened his mouth, but only a strangled, breathless sound escaped. "You wanted my penthouse to commit mortgage fraud to save your own skin," I stated, driving the final nail into his coffin. "You planned to force a deed transfer, claim the penthouse as your primary asset, and illegally leverage my equity to pay off the bank before they seized your suburban mansion. You are going to use my home, my sanctuary, to wash your dirty money." "Richard, tell me she is lying," my mother shrieked, grabbing his arm and shaking it. "Tell me you did not gamble away our home for this worthless son-in-law. Tell me we are not losing the house." My father yanked his arm away from her grasp. "Shut up, Elaine," he snapped, his voice a guttural, panicked bark. "Everyone just shut up. Arthur, do something. Fix this. Earn your massive retainer. Tell them this report is inadmissible. Tell them they have to sign the deed." Arthur Mitchell did not look up. He had reached the third page of the executive summary. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking ghostly pale and profoundly ill. He was staring at a specific document Harrison had included in the packet, a certified copy of the active notice of default filed against my parents' primary residence. It was the smoking gun. It proved beyond any shadow of a legal doubt that my father was currently insolvent. Mitchell slowly closed the folder. His hands were trembling. He took a deep, shuddering breath and pushed his heavy leather chair back from the table, physically distancing himself from my parents. If Arthur Mitchell facilitated this quitclaim deed, knowing that my father was actively hiding assets from creditors to avoid a foreclosure seizure, he would be an active participant in bankruptcy fraud. He would be participating in an illegal transfer of wealth designed to defraud a banking institution. It was not just grounds for immediate disbarment, it was grounds for a federal prison sentence. Richard Mitchell stammered, his voice tight and hoarse. "You lied to me." "I did not lie." My father roared, his panic finally exploding into full-blown hysteria. "I omitted a temporary cash flow issue. It has nothing to do with Clara's property. You are my lawyer. You are supposed to protect me. Fix this right now." "You did not tell me you had a lien on your primary residence," Mitchell continued, ignoring my father's outburst entirely. You did not disclose that you were actively in default on a massive commercial line of credit. You presented this as a simple family partition dispute to secure housing for your daughter. I paid you to draft the paperwork, my father shouted, slamming his fist on the table again. Just make her sign the damn paper. Mitchell stood up. He did not bother gathering his things. He left his silver fountain pen lying uselessly on top of the unsigned quitclaim deed. I cannot facilitate this, Mitchell stated, his voice ringing with absolute terrified finality. The room exploded. My father surged to his feet, lunging across the table toward Mitchell, his face contorted with rage. You coward, my father screamed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. You took a $50,000 retainer. You cannot walk out on me. I will ruin your firm. I will ruin your reputation. Mitchell backed away rapidly, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. As of this exact moment, I am formally withdrawing as your legal counsel, Richard. I will refund your unused retainer by the end of the business day. Do not contact my office again. If you attempt to proceed with this partition lawsuit, I will be legally obligated to report this attempted fraud to the State Bar Association. Mitchell turned on his heel and practically sprinted toward the heavy mahogany doors, desperate to escape the blast radius of my father's destruction. Arthur, my father bellowed, turning red. Come back here. At the same time, my mother turned her fury entirely on Jamal. She stood up, her perfectly manicured fingernails curled into claws. You ruined us, she shrieked, launching herself toward her son-in-law. You worthless gambling fraud. You stole my house. You stole my life. I am going to kill you. Jamal backed away, holding his hands up defensively, his custom linen blazer wrinkling as he bumped into the floor-to-ceiling window. Elaine, back off. It was a business investment. The market turned. It is not my fault the logistics deal fell through. Richard offered the money. I did not force him. Bethany buried her face in her hands and began sobbing hysterically, the sound harsh and grating in the chaotic room. My baby, Bethany wailed, rocking back and forth in her chair. What are we going to do? We have no money. We have no house. Jamal, how could you do this to us? My father spun around, pointing a trembling finger at me. He looked broken, defeated, and wildly dangerous. Look what you did, he snarled, his voice cracking. You destroyed this family, Clara. You destroyed your mother. You destroyed your pregnant sister, all over a piece of property. You selfish, ungrateful child. I stood up slowly. I buttoned the front of my crimson suit, feeling the heavy protective weight of the fabric. I did not raise my voice over the screaming and the crying. I did not need to. I had already won. I did not destroy this family, Dad. I said, my voice cold, clear, and perfectly steady. I just stopped paying the ransom to keep the illusion alive. I looked at Harrison. He stood up, snapping his briefcase shut with a sharp metallic click that cut through the noise of the room. He picked up the 3 black binders, leaving the fraudulent quitclaim deed sitting alone on the center of the table. We are finished here, I stated, turning my back on the screaming, the panic, and the ruins of the people who had tried to bury me. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, leaving my family behind to drown in the flood of their own making. The heavy brass handle of the conference room door was cold against my palm. I had barely gripped it when the sheer reality of his total and absolute ruin finally shattered my father's remaining sanity. He let out a raw, animalistic roar. I heard the violent scrape of his heavy leather chair being shoved backward, followed by the heavy thud of his dress shoes slipping against the polished marble floor. He lunged across the room toward me, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unrestrained rage, his hands outstretched like claws. You are not walking away from me, my father bellowed, spittle flying from his lips. You are going to fix this right now, Clara. He never reached me. Harrison moved with the terrifying, lethal speed of a man who had spent decades destroying corporate bullies. He stepped smoothly and solidly between us, planting his shoulder directly into my father's chest. The impact stopped my father dead in his tracks, sending him stumbling backward until he hit the edge of the mahogany table. I strongly advise you to keep your distance. Richard Harrison stated, his voice a low, vibrating hum that commanded absolute obedience. "If you take one more step toward my client, I will add physical assault and battery to your rapidly growing list of federal problems. We have already secured the security footage from this building. Do not test me." My father stood paralyzed, his chest heaving, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He looked from Harrison's unyielding frame to my completely detached expression, finally realizing that physical intimidation, his ultimate and final weapon, was utterly useless here. Harrison did not break eye contact with my father. He reached into his briefcase one final time. He pulled out the thick, meticulously tabbed document we had prepared for this exact moment and slammed it down onto the glass surface directly in front of my father's shaking hands. "That is our formal quiet title lawsuit," Harrison announced, his tone ringing with absolute finality. "We are permanently stripping your name from the Penthouse deed. Attached to it are the countersuits for extortion, targeted harassment, and attempted real estate fraud. You have exactly 24 hours to secure new legal counsel and respond. I highly suggest you find an attorney who specializes in federal bankruptcy and wire fraud. You are going to need them. We will see you in court." The sound of the heavy document hitting the table acted like a detonator. The temporary shock that had paralyzed the rest of the room instantly evaporated, and the remaining facade of our perfect family completely shattered. My mother, who had been staring blankly at the wall, suddenly seemed to process the horrific reality of Harrison's earlier financial revelations. She whipped her head around, her eyes wide with a frantic, terrifying clarity. She did not look at Jamal. She looked directly at her husband. "Richard." My mother shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch that pierced my eardrums. "You put a lien on our house. You leveraged the estate." My father tried to hold up his hands, his arrogant bluster entirely gone. "Elaine, please just calm down. It was a temporary cash flow solution. I was going to pay it back the moment we secured Clara's penthouse." "You gambled our home," my mother screamed, practically lunging at him herself. "You took the house we spent 30 years paying for, and you handed it to this worthless gambling loser. My friends are going to find out. The country club is going to find out. We are going to be homeless because of your stupid, arrogant pride." While my parents tore into each other, Bethany finally turned on Jamal. The illusion of her perfect magazine-ready suburban life was burning to ashes right in front of her eyes. $420,000, Bethany wailed, her hands curled into fists as she began beating them against Jamal's custom-tailored linen blazer. "You told me we were rich, Jamal. You told me the business was expanding. You promised me this baby was going to have a trust fund." Jamal grabbed her wrists, roughly pushing her away. He was sweating profusely, his eyes darting toward the door, clearly searching for an escape route. "Stop screaming at me, Bethany!" Jamal barked, his smooth, charming persona completely gone. "Your father handed me the money. He signed the wire transfers. He knew exactly what he was doing. Do not put all this on me." "You are a fraud!" Bethany shrieked, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "You lied to me! I am pregnant, and you gambled away our entire future!" The noise in the room was deafening. It was a cacophony of blame, panic, and sheer, unfiltered greed. Four people who had spent their entire lives pretending to be the epitome of high-class society were currently shrieking at each other like cornered animals fighting over scraps. I stood perfectly still, watching the destruction unfold. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel pity. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation. The heavy, suffocating chains I had dragged around for 35 years were finally broken. My mother suddenly stopped screaming at my father. She turned toward me, her eyes wide and desperate. She took a step forward, clasping her hands together in a pathetic, pleading gesture. "Clara?" My mother begged, her voice trembling. "Clara, please. You have to help us. You heard them. We are going to lose the house. We are going to lose everything. You have money. Your business is successful. You can pay off the lien. We are your family. You cannot just leave us like this." I looked at her. I slowly smoothed the lapels of my crimson blazer, ensuring my posture was perfectly straight. I let the silence stretch out, forcing her to stand there and wait for my response, forcing her to finally acknowledge the power dynamic she had spent my entire life trying to suppress. You spent my entire life telling anyone who would listen that I was a disappointment. I began, my voice easily cutting through the remaining arguments in the room. You called me a failure at every holiday dinner, every family gathering, and every public event because I did not have a husband or a baby. You let everyone believe my career was an embarrassing joke while you secretly relied on my hard-earned success to fund your absolute delusions of grandeur. I took one step closer to her, my expression completely cold and unyielding. Look around this room, Mom, I instructed, sweeping my hand toward the chaos. Look at your bankrupt, fraudulent husband. Look at your criminal son-in-law. Look at your desperate, greedy daughter who married a man just to secure a lifestyle she could never afford on her own. I locked eyes with her, delivering the final absolute truth. I am not the family failure, Mom. You are. I did not wait for her response. I turned my back on them for the last time. I grasped the heavy brass handle, pulled the door open, and stepped out into the bright sunlit hallway. Harrison followed closely behind me, pulling the massive door shut, but it did not fully mask the sound. As we walked down the long glass-walled corridor toward the elevators, the sound of their screaming match echoed loudly behind us, a bitter, chaotic symphony of their own destruction. The receptionist stared at us with wide, shocked eyes as we passed her desk, but I did not stop. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the heavy metal doors slide shut, permanently sealing my toxic family in the past. The descent to the lobby was the quietest, most profoundly satisfying elevator ride of my entire life. Harrison stood beside me, his posture relaxed, his thumbs flying across his smartphone screen as he already began drafting the follow-up communications to secure our absolute victory. When the heavy metal doors finally pinged open, I stepped out into the bustling downtown street and took a deep breath. The city air tasted sharp, cold, and undeniably like freedom. The next 14 days were a masterclass in scorched earth corporate litigation. Harrison did not give my family a single inch to breathe, let alone regroup. Without Arthur Mitchell, my father was cast entirely adrift. He desperately scrambled to find new legal counsel, but the legal community in this city was a small, tightly knit network. No reputable lawyer would touch a case radioactive with documented attempted mortgage fraud and federal wire fraud implications. The few bottom-feeding attorneys who even considered taking the meeting demanded astronomical upfront retainers that my father, with his frozen credit lines and looming foreclosure, simply did not possess. He tried to contact me. My phone logged 42 blocked voicemails in the first 3 days alone. My mother sent long, unhinged emails swinging wildly between begging for financial salvation and viciously accusing me of destroying the family legacy. Bethany sent text messages from a burner phone playing the ultimate victim, claiming the stress of my selfishness was harming her unborn child. I read absolutely none of it. I forwarded every single piece of electronic correspondence directly to Harrison's paralegal and instructed my agency's front desk security to immediately turn away any unannounced visitors. I erected a fortress around my life, and they were permanently locked outside the gates. By day 12, the reality of his total annihilation finally broke my father's arrogant pride. Harrison delivered our final non-negotiable ultimatum. My father would sign a voluntary deed relinquishment permanently and irrevocably severing any legal, equitable, or historical claim to the penthouse. If he refused, we would formally file the quiet title action the following morning and simultaneously submit the complete unredacted forensic accounting report to the federal authorities and the bank currently holding the note on his suburban mansion. It was not a negotiation, it was a legal execution. On the morning of the 14th day, a bonded courier arrived at my office. He bypassed the reception desk and handed me a thick sealed envelope bearing the heavy embossed logo of Vance Sterling and Croft. Inside was the final documentation. My father had signed the papers. I stared at his signature on the bottom line. The bold, sweeping, authoritative handwriting I had recognized my entire life was gone. The ink was jagged, weak, and trailing off at the end, the physical, undeniable manifestation of a completely broken man. He had surrendered entirely. I ran my fingers over the crisp legal paper, feeling the notary seal stamped into the corner. The penthouse was 100% mine. There were no hidden clauses, no phantom equitable claims, no avenues left for them to appeal or attack. The phantom tether my father had used to try and drag me down with his sinking ship was severed permanently. I picked up my smartphone, opened my contacts, and permanently deleted the numbers for my father, my mother, my sister, and Jamal. I blocked their email addresses and routed their names to an automatic spam filter. The silence that followed in my office was absolute perfection. The fallout trickled in over the next several months, delivered not by family, but through the cold, objective lens of public county records and mutual business acquaintances. The destruction they had brought upon themselves was absolute and entirely merciless. 30 days after our explosive meeting in Arthur Mitchell's office, the bank formally foreclosed on my parents' sprawling suburban mansion. The house they had weaponized for decades as a symbol of their ultimate superiority was auctioned off to the highest bidder. My mother's ultimate nightmare became her daily reality. They were forced to vacate the premises and move into a tiny, run-down two-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. I heard through a former neighbor that she refused to leave the apartment during daylight hours, too deeply humiliated to risk facing the affluent country club friends she had spent her entire life trying to impress. Jamal met an even harsher, more public fate. Without my father's equity to illegally bail him out, his creditors closed in with breathtaking speed. He was forced into Chapter 7 bankruptcy. His luxury vehicles were repossessed from his driveway in the middle of the afternoon. The federal investigation into his offshore gambling accounts resulted in massive, crushing fines and a permanent stain on his financial record that ensured he would never secure a legitimate corporate loan again. Bethany, permanently stripped of her golden child status and the luxury lifestyle she firmly believed she was owed simply for existing, was stuck in a cramped, noisy rental unit. The glamorous magazine-ready maternity shoots and designer baby clothes she had planned were completely wiped out. Instead, she was thrust into the harsh reality of clipping coupons and fighting daily with the man who had ruined them. The grand illusion of their perfect, highly curated marriage crumbled instantly, leaving behind only bitter resentment and screaming matches over missing rent payments that the neighbors regularly complained about. I did not gloat. I did not reach out to offer my fake condolences. I simply kept moving forward. Despite the absolute victory, walking into the penthouse began to feel different. The space felt heavy forever, tainted by the memory of their entitlement and the ghost of my father's manipulation. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield where I had been forced to wage war. I listed it on the market a week later. Thanks to the booming downtown real estate sector and the flawless high-end interior design upgrades I had installed over the years, the property sparked an aggressive bidding war within 48 hours. I sold it for a massive, unprecedented profit, walking away with a cash offer far above the initial $1.5 million valuation. I took that money, combined it with the surging profits from my thriving agency, and bought exactly what I wanted. I purchased a stunning, ultra-modern architectural mansion tucked high into the hills above the city. It was a masterpiece of glass steel and dark wood, surrounded by old-growth trees and absolute impenetrable privacy. Every single brick, every massive window, and every square foot of the sprawling land was entirely legally in my own name. On my first night in the new house, the moving boxes were still stacked neatly in the massive living room. I unpacked a single box containing my favorite heavy crystal glassware. I poured myself a generous measure of aged single malt scotch, the amber liquid catching the ambient light, and walked out onto the expansive glass balcony. The city lights glittered miles below me, a vast silent ocean of distant activity. The air up here was cool, sharp, and perfectly clean. I took a slow sip of the scotch, feeling the warm burn slide down my throat, grounding me in the present moment. I leaned against the glass railing and looked out over the horizon as the sun dipped below the tree line, painting the evening sky in brilliant, fiery shades of crimson and gold. For the first time in my entire life, I was completely, utterly free of their toxicity. I had built an empire with my own two hands, defended it against the people who should have protected me, and no one would ever lay claim to my success again. They thought blood gave them the right to steal my future. They learned the hard way that the only thing blood guarantees is DNA, not loyalty. Have you ever had to expose a family member's toxic secret to protect yourself?